Chapter 703. Where are you going, Mr. Meg? Kaido asked curiously as soon as Meg and the others left. It's rare for us to come to Rodu, so we're going out for a walk, Meg replied with a smile. Of course, he wasn't going to say that he was going to the Magus Tower. I see. His Highness was very pleased with the breakfast, so he asked me to ask Mr. Meg if you're going out. We'll prepare a carriage for you. Kaido nodded before changing the topic with a smile, and said, however, His Highness really likes your cooking, so he instructed Mr. Mag to prepare lunch for us as well. Hence, we have to come back before noon. We're very busy at noon, so we won't be able to come back in time. Tell Josh that I'm taking my precious disciple out to play, and Mr. Mac will be responsible for cooking for us. He can find someone else to cook for him. Before Meg had a chance to say anything, Crassus pursed his lips and said to Kaido, oh, right. Tell him that I'm Crassus. Crassus. It was only then that Kaido noticed Crassus, who was wearing a white mage's robe and holding a mage's staff that was taller than a man. His eyes widened, and he was stunned for a moment before he hurriedly nodded and said, I understand. There were very few people in the Roth Empire who didn't know that Crassus was a legendary magic caster who had established the Magus Tower's status in the Roth Empire. He had also been the president of the Magus Tower for several decades, and even the second prince had to bow to him respectfully. Who would have thought that he would appear in the second prince's manor, and that his disciple would be Meg's daughter? Crassus was very pleased with Kaido's reaction. He waved a hand, and said, prepare a carriage for us. All right, I'll get it ready right away. Kaido hurried out as if he had been granted amnesty. The second prince had already left, so even if he was in the manor, he wouldn't refuse this legendary magic caster's request for a carriage. Ha! Teacher Crassus, did you put a tiger on your face? Amy asked curiously as she circled Crassus. No. Then why was that uncle so scared when he saw you? Amy was still puzzled. Crassus laughed heartily and said, powerful strength can make others respect you. Amy will also have the same strength as Master in the future. When that time comes, even if you don't put a tiger on your face, people will still respect you. Then I think it's easier to stick to the tiger. Amy pouted. Meow, ugly duckling meowed. I'm not talking about you. Amy pressed Ugly Duckling's head down. Kaido came back quickly and brought Meg and the others to the front gate. A large black carriage with the second prince's insignia was parked at the gate. Sir Crassus, please get in the carriage. Kaido smiled as he lifted the curtain and said politely. Crassus didn't even take a single glance at him before getting into the carriage. Meg carried Amy onto the carriage before turning to Kaido with a smile, and said, thank you for your hard work. Of course not. It's my honor to be able to smile for you, Sir Crassus. Kaido was full of smiles. He had thought that this young man was here to suck up to the second prince, but who would have thought that he had such a powerful backer behind him that he couldn't afford to offend. Kaido gave some instructions to the coachman, and the carriage began to speed away. Meg lifted the curtain and looked outside. The wide street was large enough to accommodate 16 carriages side by side. In modern times, that would be a 16-lane street. The street was paved with smooth black stone slabs, and the walls of the second prince's manor extended into the distance. On both sides of the street were quite grand buildings. This was where all of the Roth Empire's officials resided. No matter how rich a merchant was, he didn't have the right to live here. Not far away, he could see the tall walls of the royal palace, as well as the grand buildings within the walls. They were shimmering with golden light under the morning sun, making it difficult for him to look directly at them. In the northern direction of the royal palace, there was a grayish-black 9-story tower. The massive tower extended all the way into the clouds, and each story was around 20 to 30 meters tall. It was as if there were silent guards guarding the royal palace. Many things in the depths of Mag's memories suddenly surged forth. His memories of Rodu, the towering Magus Tower, and the chaotic battle that had taken place 3 years ago also became extremely clear. He remembered every single face, identity, and name of every single person who had been there. The Magus Tower had contributed a lot to that ambush 3 years ago. However, they weren't stupid, and they knew what the consequences would be if their plan were to fail or be exposed one day. As such, among the members of the Magus Tower's Presidium, Elder Elliot was the only one who participated in the ambush. Furthermore, he wore a mask the entire time, and didn't do anything. He had met Josh the day before, and just from his appearance alone, he did appear to be a very kind and amiable second prince. If Meg didn't know about the filthy things that he had done in the past, perhaps he would have a good impression of him. He was a powerful mask. Today, he was going to visit the Magus Tower. As long as he could pass this test, he wouldn't have to worry about his identity being exposed for the time being. He could continue to work as a good chef and steadily grow in power. What a tall pillar. Master, can we go there and play? Amy also caught sight of the Magus Tower, and she asked with an expectant look on her face. Crassus' expression darkened upon hearing this, and he awkwardly said, "That's exactly where we're going today. However, that's not a pillar, it's a tower. The Magus Tower was designed and built by me all those years ago. Isn't it very spectacular?" "Oh, so it was designed by Master. I was wondering why a normal person would erect such a tall pillar of bamboo there." Amy nodded in understanding. "It's not a pillar, it's a tower." Crassus was feeling a little conflicted. In the past, this was one of his proudest works. He had once thought that he was a designer who had been held back by magic, and he felt quite regretful about it. "Got it. It's a pillar that looks like a tower." Amy nodded. "All right, then it's a pillar." Crassus conceded. There was no way that he could convince Amy about something like this. The horse-drawn carriage traveled for about half an hour before stopping at the plaza outside the Magus Tower's main entrance. Meg and the others alighted from the carriage. The grandeur of the Magus Tower was even more apparent in front of them. On the spacious plaza, the majestic tower that was constructed from huge black stones pierced straight into the sky. Standing in front of the tower, they were like ants, and they couldn't help but feel a sense of insignificance. Magicians wearing robes embroidered with the symbol of the Magus Tower walked in and out of the gate that was over 10 meters tall. There weren't that many magicians anywhere. Master Crassus. Chapter 704. The young magic caster's voice instantly attracted everyone's attention. Master Crassus. He really is a master. Didn't the master go to Chaos City already? Why is he here? And why is he sitting in the second prince's horse-drawn carriage? That's right. I also heard that he took in a half-elf as his disciple. Hank and George went to Chaos City to challenge Chaos School, and were defeated by that half-elf. I can't believe something like that happened. Could it be that little girl by the master's side? She looks like she's only 3 or 4 years old. Hank is a 4th-tier magic caster, how could he be defeated by her? The Magus Tower was built by Crassus, and the code of conduct that all magic casters had to follow was set by Crassus. Even the magic casters in the Magus Tower talked about Master Crassus the most, aside from President Richard. As such, it was very difficult for the magic casters in the Magus Tower to not know about the #1 melee magic caster on the Norland continent, one of the founders of the Magus Tower, and the god of fire, Crassus. His legend was an eternal topic among magic casters. The battle between melee magic and long-range magic, and between fire magic and ice magic casters, was a classic topic in the history of magic. Crassus was also known as a living fossil. His feud and battle with Julian also attracted the attention of the entire magic caster world. When the news that Crassus and Julian had taken in the same disciple spread, almost no one believed it. The battle between ice and fire had been going on for close to 100 years, and the two of them were like fire and water. How could they take in the same disciple? However, this news was soon confirmed, and caused quite a stir in the magic caster world. Everyone was speculating whether Crassus and Julian's disciple would be a super prodigy, or a piece of trash due to the conflict between ice and fire. After that, the disciple of Crassus and Julian became famous after her battle with Hank and George. She trampled on the faces of the two prodigy disciples of the Magus Tower, and became the most popular rising star in the magic caster world. From being taken in as a disciple by Crassus and Julian to defeating the fourth-tier prodigy magic caster Hank, that little half-elf girl only took a little over a month. There was no doubt that he was a genius. The nearby magic casters bowed respectfully to Crassus, but their eyes fell on Amy. They all wanted to see what this genius magic caster, who was thought to be able to surpass Princess Irina, looked like. She's so adorable. She's so talented and adorable, just like Princess Irina back in the day. I'm so envious. A female magic caster looked at Amy with an envious expression. Yeah, I really want to hold her in my arms and pinch her little cheeks. They must be super soft. The female magician next to her had a love-struck smile on her face. Miss, your way of thinking is very dangerous. If I'm fierce, I'm super fierce. Amy hid behind Meg before handing Ugly Duckling over with both hands. If you really want to pinch it, then pinch Ugly Duckling. Oh, Ugly Duckling had an expression on its face. Who am I? Where was I? What are these horrible women going to do to me? Even his cat is so adorable. The eyes of the young ladies lit up even more. If it weren't for the fact that Crassus was standing right next to them, they would have most likely pounced on Amy to pinch her cheeks. Scary. Amy hurriedly withdrew Ugly Duckling and hid behind Meg. Meg also felt that these women were a little scary. He had thought that the trip to the Magus Tower would be quite depressing, but who would have thought that these magic casters would have such great respect and admiration for Crassus? For a moment it was difficult to tell who was the enemy. Crassus was clearly quite pleased with everyone's reaction. He waved a hand with a smile, and said, "You can all go now. If you have the time, why don't you spend it practicing magic?" All of the magic casters dispersed. Even though Crassus didn't have an official disciple in the Magus Tower, all of the older magic casters in the Magus Tower had received guidance from him. Now, they were all the pillars of the Magus Tower, so no one dared to disobey him. Master Crassus, I didn't think that you would be so powerful. Are you sure you didn't get too close? Only after everyone had dispersed did Amy emerge from behind Meg. She was still in disbelief as she stared at Crassus' face. Why didn't she realize that her master was so powerful in the past? Crassus was very pleased with Amy's performance. Nothing made him happier than being praised by his precious disciple. After all, it wasn't easy to hear praise from her. He stroked his beard with a smile, and said, "The best is yet to come. Let's go in." "All right." Amy nodded, and skipped behind Crassus with Ugly Duckling in her arms as they walked into the Magus Tower. Meg looked up at the towering Magus Tower, and could vaguely see a magic barrier enshrouding the outside of the Magus Tower. It was said that this magic barrier could withstand 10th-tier attacks, but the Magus Tower hadn't been attacked for many years, so it had yet to be tested. What would happen if Meg were to attack Alex at his peak? Meg wondered to himself. However, he quickly withdrew his gaze and followed Crassus toward the entrance. The two teams of guards at the entrance of the Magus Tower wore conflicted expressions. In particular, the team leader's brows were furrowed as he looked at Crassus, who was getting closer and closer to him. News of Crassus' departure from the Magus Tower had already been made known to all magic casters. Nominally, Crassus was no longer a magic caster of the Magus Tower, so he couldn't enter the Magus Tower without permission or invitation. However, who dared to stop Crassus? This was a great magic caster who had destroyed 2 Magus Towers in a fit of rage, and then rebuilt a new one from the rubble. He had almost single-handedly created the current Magus Tower, so who dared to stop him from entering? Although he was also a 6th-tier magic caster, and could open the Magus Tower at any time, he had to invite many 10th-tier magic casters to protect the magic barrier. However, he didn't want to face an enraged Crassus even if he was facing a 10th-tier berserk giant dragon. That was because he couldn't bear the responsibility of destroying the Magus Tower a 3rd time. Furthermore, even if he invited 10th-tier magic casters, who would do anything as long as Crassus didn't harbor any ill intentions? However, if he didn't stop him, he would inevitably be blamed when the higher-ups investigated. It wasn't a secret that President Richard and Master Crassus didn't get along well. In just a few dozen steps, the team leader's back was already drenched in sweat. "Crassus, I didn't expect you to come back." Right at this moment, a slightly aged voice sounded. Chapter 705. The guard captain heaved a sigh of relief, and stood off to the side. All of the magic casters also turned to the purple-robed magic caster standing at the entrance of the Magus Tower, and bowed respectfully. "Greetings, President." Richard was the chairman of the Magus Tower's Board of Elders, the president of the Roth Empire's Magic Caster Guild, and the current owner of this Magus Tower. He was also one of the most powerful people in the Roth Empire. Crassus was the creator of the Magus Tower, giving all magic casters a place of pilgrimage and advancement, while Richard was the man who made the Magus Tower one of the twin towers of the Roth Empire. It was on par with the military, and the status of magic casters was greatly elevated. Meg narrowed his eyes as he appraised Richard. This man definitely had something to do with that incident. Without his orders, there definitely wouldn't have been so many magic casters in the Magus Tower. Richard was a tall and broad man in a purple Magus robe. His white hair was combed back neatly, but his beard was as black as ink. He stood at the entrance of the Magus Tower, looking at Crassus with a calm expression. He didn't seem to be surprised or elated at all, as if he had already expected this. All of the magic casters at the entrance of the Magus Tower were also completely silent. No one dared to make a sound, but no one left either. All of them were carefully appraising Crassus and Richard. There had been rumors in the Magus Tower for a long time that Crassus and Richard were at odds with one another. However, Crassus had already withdrawn from the management of the Magus Tower in recent years, and was more like a spiritual presence. However, a month ago, news of Crassus' withdrawal from the Magus Tower was confirmed by the Magus Tower. Not only did this cause everyone's jaws to drop, it also indirectly proved that the relationship between Crassus and Richard had already reached an irreconcilable level. However, a month ago, Richard had sent his prized disciple to Rodu to challenge Crassus' disciple, only to be defeated. What was Crassus' intention now that he had brought his disciple to the Magus Tower? Crassus' reputation as the god of fire wasn't just for show. He looked like a benevolent old man, but as someone who had destroyed the Magus Tower on multiple occasions, his fiery temper couldn't be measured by his appearance. He wasn't the type to swallow his anger after being provoked. One was the spiritual symbol of the Magus Tower, while the other was the chairman of the Magus Tower's Board of Elders. If the two of them were to clash, and that was something that everyone's opinion. It was impossible to go out and help, but it was very important to support someone psychologically. Crassus also stopped in his tracks. He looked at Richard and asked with a smile, "Why? Can't I come back?" Richard frowned. "If you want to come back, no one will stop you, and no one can stop you. And no one of the Magus Tower, so why are you here today?" "I've never owed anyone anything." You asked your disciple's disciple to give me a gift. Today, I've brought my disciple here to return the favor. Crossy walked toward Richard. The crowd subconsciously parted to the sides. And where's that fatso Brent? I told him to come to Chaos City within 10 days to apologize, but it looks like he forgot who I was after I left the Magus Tower. Crassus stopped in front of Richard, and looked around with a hostile expression. Crassus, you were once a founding member of the Magus Tower, but you're no longer a member of our Magus Tower. Don't try to do anything to President Richard. Elliot roared as his wand appeared in his hand, ready to strike at any moment. Crassus turned to Elliot with an amused smile, and said, You dare to attack me? I. Elliot took half a step back instinctively, and mustered his courage as he looked at Richard's back. He forced himself to remain calm, and said, If you continue to be so impudent, then don't blame me for not caring about our old friendship. Bam! Crassus, who had been standing in front of Richard, appeared in front of Elliot in an instant. The staff in his hand, which was taller than a man, smashed into Elliot's face, and smashed him into the ground. Did I hurt you? Crassus asked with a smile as he pointed his magic caster's staff at Elliot, who was lying on the ground with a crimson mark in the middle of his face. I. Elliot grabbed his magic caster's staff, and roared angrily as he tried to get up. There was even magic gathering on his wand. Bam! Elliot, who had just gotten up, was smacked back down again, and the left side of his face instantly swelled up. I'm very sentimental, aren't I? Crassus continued with a smile. Elliot was still trying to struggle. Bam! 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 It hurts. It hurts. It hurts. Elliot's sobbing screams reverberated throughout the entire Magus Tower. So powerful. Melee magic is actually so terrifying. Yeah, I've long heard that Master Crassus' melee magic is almost invincible in close combat. I didn't believe it in the past, but I do now. I suddenly want to learn melee magic, but there are almost no teachers in our Magus Tower to teach melee magic. Master Crassus has also left the Magus Tower. What a pity. All of the spectating magic casters widened their eyes in shock. Elliot was the 5th elder of the Magus Tower, a powerful 10th tier magic caster, but he couldn't even retaliate in the face of Crassus. He was being smacked around like a sandbag by the magic caster's staff. Even though he was holding onto his magic caster's staff, he didn't have any opportunity to release any magic. Even the magic barrier he had put up was easily torn apart by the magic caster's staff. The dull thuds were painful to listen to, and accompanied by the cries of agony, many people felt as if they had vented their frustrations at the thought of Elder Elliot's usual proud expression. So you have to use a magic caster's staff to slap his face. It's indeed more satisfying this way. Amy stood at the side and clapped her little hands to cheer for Crassus. She looked as if she had just learned something. This old man's temper is indeed very fiery. Mag was rather speechless. Only Crossu would dare to beat up a 10th tier elder in the Magus Tower's territory. Furthermore, most of the magic casters present didn't seem to be enraged by Crossu's actions. Instead, they seemed to be enjoying the show. Enough! Richard yelled. He raised his hand, and a water mirror appeared in front of Elliot's face. Bam! The magic caster's staff fell, and the water mirror shattered. However, it still landed on Elliot's face and knocked him unconscious. His swollen face was a horrible sight to behold. Enough! Crassus glanced at Elliot, who was lying on the ground, and nodded slightly. Seems like it. The veins on Richard's forehead began to throb as he flared up. Crassus, what are you trying to achieve by coming here today? Are you really going to make an enemy of our Magus Tower? Chapter 706. Are you sure you don't want to tell me the truth, fatso. Believe it or not, I'll peel off your pigskin and fry you into a roast suckling pig. In a dark room, a woman was holding a chair, and she slammed it viciously into the kneeling fatso, instantly pulverizing the chair into pieces. The fatso huddled up in a corner with his arms wrapped around his head, and his voice trembled as he said, Princess, please spare me. I really don't know what you're talking about. Our Magus Tower really had nothing to do with what happened back then. Besides, roast pigs aren't supposed to be cooked like that. You're still trying to argue with me. I said it was done like that, so that's what he did. A chair suddenly appeared in the woman's hand, and she slammed it viciously into the fatso's body. Elliot had been knocked unconscious, and even Richard had been threatened. All of the magic casters at the entrance of the Magus Tower fell silent upon hearing Crassus' words. After all, Crassus was no longer a member of the Magus Tower, and his purpose in coming here was to embarrass the Magus Tower. This was a slap to the Magus Tower's face. As a member of the Magus Tower, everyone naturally began to sympathize with Crassus and stood on the Magus Tower's side. Master Crassus, are you saying that the half-elf girl and Kola should have a tower-charging duel? Kola is the last disciple of the president, and he's already reached the 5th tier at the age of 12. He's been praised as the most prodigious magic caster in the history of the Magus Tower, and his opponent is the Elven Princess. Not only is Brother Kola the youngest magic caster to reach the 5th level of the tower, he's also the fastest among all of the 5th tier magic casters. This little girl has only been learning magic for 2 months. How could she possibly reach the 5th level of the tower? All of the magic casters were discussing quietly among themselves. Even though they had heard many rumors about Amy's prodigy, none of the magic casters present believed that an adorable little girl like her could reach the 5th level of the tower. It wasn't easy to become a magic caster, and many magic casters were unable to reach the intermediate magic caster level in their entire lives. Aside from the most exceptional young prodigies, magic casters who could enter the Magus Tower had to be at least a 4th tier magic caster. Even so, many mages who came to the Mage Tower still found it difficult to advance to level 5 even after a long time. The ability bestowment was a hurdle that stopped many people. Apart from those who were talented, those who were able to cross it were all people who could persevere. Kola had been cultivating for 6 years, and at the age of 12, he had successfully attained the ability bestowment mastery. He was already hailed as the #1 prodigy in the Magus Tower, and he was far superior to Hank and George. If Amy could successfully endow magic after only 2 or 3 months of magic, then what kind of terrifying talent was that? It was enough to shock the ancient and dazzle the modern. After being threatened by Crassus in front of so many magic casters, Richard's expression was obviously a little ugly, but he didn't lose control. He glanced at Amy, then at Crassus, and sneered, "You've only accepted her as your disciple for 2 months. How can she compare to my disciple? I wonder whose grand disciple was beaten to tears." Crassus pursed his lips as he pulled out a blue crystal with a smile. "I'll bet this water spirit bead that my disciple will win. If she loses, then you can have the water spirit bead, but if your disciple loses, then the fire spirit lotus in your hand will be mine." Richard's eyes immediately lit up at the sight of the water spirit bead in Crassus' hand. He looked at Crassus, then at Amy, and hesitated momentarily before nodding. "All right, it's a deal. It's a deal." Crassus stowed away the water spirit bead as a sly smile appeared on his face. "Is Amy already a 5th tier magic caster?" Meg was also a little perplexed. He had been busy with all of the work related to the steam engine, so he hadn't been paying enough attention to Amy. Both the water spirit bead and the fire spirit lotus were precious treasures of heaven and earth. The water spirit bead was a treasure that could mend one's soul and enhance one's spiritual power for water-type magic casters. The fire spirit lotus, on the other hand, had a special effect. If a fire-type magic caster were to consume it, they could develop some mutated abilities. The effects varied from person to person. Some people would only learn a low-level fire-type spell, while others would gain some fire-type talents, such as enhancing the corrosiveness of their spells. Such a bet was undoubtedly a huge gamble. However, Meg didn't think that Crassus was an idiot. No one knew the situation of the Magus Tower better than he did. It was impossible for Crassus to not have any confidence in the outcome after traveling so far to Rodu. Everyone entered the hall on the first floor of the Magus Tower. It was a spacious hall that was 3 to 4 meters tall and as big as a football field. News of the battle between Crassus and Richard's disciple quickly spread throughout the entire Magus Tower. Many magic casters rushed to the first floor to witness this battle between two prodigies. Or rather, it could be said that it was a battle between the new and old masters of the Magus Tower, Richard and Crassus. The Magus Tower Challenge was a competition that Crassus had set up in order to nurture the wolf-like nature of magic casters. Not only could it test the power of magic casters, but it could also effectively rank them based on the number of floors they reached and the time they took to reach the tower. There was no need to go through a lot of trouble to compete against each other. Crassus had always believed that magic casters should beat themselves the most. As long as a magic caster could continue to improve themselves, they would definitely become exceptional magic casters. Of course, there would only be more motivation if there were other magic casters to beat them. This was also why he had used magic to monitor the entire tower challenge process in real time and record the time taken. This system had been in place for several decades, and it constantly spurred the magic casters of the Magus Tower to improve. If the time taken was extended beyond a certain point, they would be expelled from the Magus Tower. This was most likely the reason why the Magus Tower was able to maintain its reputation as the Holy Land of magic casters. The Magus Tower was 9 floors tall, and there were also a total of 9 levels. Each level corresponded to the limit of one's power level, and the higher one went, the more difficult it would be, and the more time it would take. "Master, may I ask why you've called Cola here?" A young man in a white robe strode into the crowd before cupping his fist in a respectful salute toward Richard. "Cola, I want you to compete with Crassus' disciple in a tower challenge. You have to reach the 5th floor as quickly as possible and let them know that our Magus Tower is not to be underestimated." Richard looked at Cola with a smug expression as he chuckled coldly. "Yes." Cola nodded with a calm expression that was completely uncharacteristic of his young age, and he was looking at Amy with a hint of disdain in his eyes. "Little Amy, it's time for you to shine." Crassus turned to Amy with a smile. Chapter 707. Don't hit him, let's go to the tower first. Crassus pointed at the 2 doors not far away from them with a smile, and said, "After we go in, all we have to do is go to the 5th level." "I see. All right then." Amy was a little disappointed as she withdrew her little fists. It appeared that she wouldn't be able to hammer him in the chest for the time being. "Let's begin," Richard said in a calm voice. "Sure." Crassus nodded without the slightest hint of nervousness. "Be careful, Amy." Meg patted Amy's head. A test like this most likely wouldn't be dangerous. Otherwise, Crassus definitely wouldn't have allowed Amy to participate. "Yes, Father, I'll definitely get 1st place." Amy nodded obediently before handing Ugly Duckling to Meg before making her way toward the open door. Cola stopped in front of the gate, and turned to Amy with a mocking voice as he said, "Don't think that you're all that just because you beat those 2 idiots, George and Hank. They're still far inferior to me. You're going to see who the true prodigy is in a moment." "So you also think those 2 are idiots?" Amy exclaimed with a surprised expression. Cola's expression immediately stiffened upon hearing this. He was only going to mock this little brat, but he didn't think that she would yell out in such a loud voice. George and Richard's eldest disciples' expressions both darkened upon hearing this. "Humph. Cola clenched his fists and harumphed coldly before stepping into the room on the left. He had to get out of the exit on the 5th level at least twice as fast as this little brat. Of course, she would probably only be able to get out of the exit on the 4th level. Master Crassus said that no matter what we encounter, we have to beat them with a single punch. Isn't that a little unfair to Master Julian? Amy also walked into the room on the right. The heavy black metal door slowly closed, and a 1-minute countdown appeared on the door. There was also a real-time broadcast and timer beside the door, so they could see the progress of both parties in real time. There shouldn't be any suspense in this battle, right? Cola successfully passed the 5th floor half a year ago, and his speed has been increasing over the past 6 months. Not long ago, he even broke the record for a 5th-tier magic caster. If we lose like this, then our Magus Tower will be completely humiliated. We're definitely going to win. If that little girl was also 12 years old, I think this would be another crushing game. Even though some of the magic casters were complaining about Amy's age, most of the magic casters present were clearly more optimistic about Cola's chances of victory. There has never been a pure melee mage who has charged into a tower before. Perhaps this will be a duel worth looking forward to. In the crowd, a tall and thin mage smiled as he muttered to himself. His eyes were fixed in the direction of the 2 doors, his face full of anticipation. Looks like it won't take long, Meg murmured to himself as he looked at the nonchalant smile on Crassus' face. Every second of the 60-second countdown seemed to be weighing heavily on everyone's hearts. Even though most of the magic casters had already decided that this was going to be a one-sided battle, no one could truly remain as calm as a placid lake until the final outcome was revealed. Even Richard was staring intently at the countdown on the door. 3, 2, 1, the countdown concluded, and at the same time, a ring of green light lit up on the black metal door. 10 seconds. Cola only took 5 seconds to clear the 1st floor. Someone in the crowd let loose a cry of surprise. The number on Cola's floor had already become 2, while Amy's floor was still 1. Richard's magic caster's face was filled with excitement and smugness. This was a good start, 20 seconds. Cola has passed the 2nd floor. Someone soon yelled with excitement. In just 30 seconds, Cola's number had already reached 3, while Amy's number was still at 1, 30 seconds. Cola has passed the 3rd floor. Half a minute later, the number on Cola's door had already reached 4, while the number on Amy's door hadn't changed in the slightest. There's such a huge gap between them. Where did she get the confidence to challenge Junior Brother Cola? Yeah, it looks like Junior Brother Cola will come out of the 5th floor, while she'll still be on the 1st floor. Could it be that melee magic casters are at such a disadvantage when it comes to tower charging? The 1st floor tests one's ability to evade low-level magic spells, the 2nd floor tests one's ability to control obstacles with their spiritual power, the 3rd floor tests one's ability to resist spiritual power, the 4th floor tests one's ability to use intermediate magic, and the 5th floor tests one's ability to use illusion and ability endowment in battle. All of these floors are like throwing eggs at a rock for melee magic casters. The magic casters from Richard's faction were already preparing to celebrate. All of the other magic casters were also a little disappointed. They had thought that this would be an interesting match between 2 evenly matched opponents, but it looked like this was nothing more than a boring match between the 2 of them. A smile also appeared on Richard's face. He had been searching for the water spirit bead for the past few years in order to make up for the mental ailment that he had suffered from many years ago, and he didn't think that the Crassus would deliver one to him today. Did you not find the door? Crassus murmured to himself as he raised his eyebrows in confusion. Did you forget to start running? Meg was also rather perplexed. Even if melee magic casters were at a disadvantage when it came to tower charging, Amy had learned long-range ice magic from Julian, so there was no way that she couldn't even pass the 1st floor. Can we go now? At the entrance to the trial floor, Amy reached out with her little hand to touch the transparent wall in front of her, only to find that it had disappeared. She thought to herself for a moment before slapping her own head. Crap, Master told me to run faster. A pair of wind-fire wheels appeared beneath her feet, and she disappeared on the spot. She moved. She passed the first floor in 61 seconds. Someone in the crowd suddenly yelled. The number on Amy's door had indeed changed from 1 to 2. However, even an ordinary fourth-tier disciple of the Magus Tower could easily pass the first floor in 61 seconds. The magic casters who had been bored and were about to leave only raised their heads to take a look before preparing to leave. She moved again. 62 seconds. She passed the second floor. However, everyone's eyes widened in disbelief as they stared at the number on the door that had changed from 2 to 3, as well as the 62 seconds. She passed the second floor in 1 second. How is this possible? The entire hall on the first floor was in an uproar. The magic casters were all dumbfounded, and their worldview was greatly impacted. This is impossible. Richard was also in disbelief. How could a fourth-tier magic caster pass the second floor in 1 second, 65 seconds? She passed the third floor. My God! Who is she? Chapter 708. In just 5 seconds, Amy had passed 3 levels in quick succession, and everyone's jaws had dropped to the ground. All of the magic casters who were preparing to leave stopped in their tracks as they stared at the red number on the door with incredulity etched on their faces. Even for a 7th-tier magic caster, it was virtually impossible for them to pass 3 levels in less than 5 seconds, but this was happening to a 4-year-old little girl. She had passed the second level in 1 second and the third level in 3 seconds, so there was naturally no way that she had passed the first level in less than 61 seconds. Yet, this little girl had given Cola a head start of 60 seconds. What kind of confidence was this? How? How is this possible? Richard's expression immediately darkened upon seeing this. The competition was already set in stone, yet such a drastic turn of events had taken place. If this disciple of Crassus continued to maintain this speed, then there was no way that Cola would be able to keep up with her. Cola's number remained at 4, and all of the magic casters from Richard's faction wore strained expressions on their faces. If this little girl really did give Cola a head start of 60 seconds and still beat him in the end, then that would be a massive humiliation to them. A short and portly magic caster chuckled coldly. The first 3 levels were easy, but there's no way that you can take advantage of the 4th level. If you don't know powerful intermediate magic, then there's no way that you'll be able to defeat the guardian magic beast. Brother Cola will definitely be able to pass this level first. All of the magic casters nodded in agreement. This man was right. The 3rd level was a test of one's mastery of intermediate magic, and only those who were proficient in intermediate magic would be able to quickly defeat the guardian magic beast and pass this level. It's moving again. 70 seconds. She only took 5 seconds to pass the 4th level. As soon as the short and portly magic caster's voice trailed off, the number on Amy's door changed again to a bright red number 5. The bright red number 5 was like a resounding slap to the face of the intermediate magic caster, and his face instantly flushed red as he lowered his head, wishing that he could find a hole to crawl into. She can't even be described as a prodigy. She's a freak. She's a freak. Even though she gave him a head start of 60 seconds, I have a feeling that a new record is going to be set. Is melee magic really that invincible? Why doesn't the Magus Tower teach melee magic? I really want to learn. All of the magic casters present were completely unable to remain calm. All of the magic casters who could enter the Magus Tower were the cream of the crop of the Roth Empire's crop of magic casters, but the competition that was taking place right now was going to shatter everything they knew. This face slap is as standard as a textbook. You have indeed learned my essence. Crassus stroked his beard with satisfaction, his face glowing. Like father, like daughter. As expected. Meg also had a gratified look on his face. Seeing the group of magic casters being so excited over Amy, he felt a wonderful feeling. It was as if he was even happier than being praised himself. In just 10 seconds, Amy had passed through 4 stages in quick succession. In contrast, Cola was still stuck in the 4th stage without making any progress. Her speed, which used to break records, was now like an ant crawling in front of Amy. Will she be able to pass the 5th stage? What I'm more concerned about now is how many seconds she can take to pass and leave behind a record that no one else can ever break. Everyone was looking at Amy's door with anticipation and curiosity in their eyes. Only magic casters who have successfully mastered the ability bestowment and illusion of form have a chance of passing the 5th stage. She only reached the 4th tier a month ago, so there's no way that she's already mastered the ability bestowment and illusion of form. The short and portly magic caster was unwilling to give up, and he raised his head with a confident expression. On the 5th floor, in a bright and empty desert space, Amy looked at a giant saw-toothed tiger that was close to 5 meters in length and 2 meters in height. She looked at the staff in her hand, and contemplated momentarily before shaking her head as she said, "No, I can't just use the magic that Teacher Crassus taught me. Teacher Julian will be very sad if he learns about this." Roar! The giant saw-toothed tiger glared at Amy with its crimson eyes, and let loose a thunderous roar of fury as it charged toward Amy. Sand and dust were kicked up into the air, and 4 sandstorms appeared around it. Amy's staff transformed into a wand, and she waved it at the giant saw-toothed tiger in an unhurried manner. She wore a serious expression as she said, "Be a good boy, little tiger. Otherwise, a fat cat will fall from the sky." The giant saw-toothed tiger clearly didn't understand what Amy was saying, and it picked up speed. Aside from the 4 sandstorms sweeping toward it, there were also earthy yellow wind blades appearing beneath its hooves. Its sharp claws were sharp enough to flatten a human with a single swipe of its claws. In the blink of an eye, it had reached less than 10 meters away from Amy, and the saliva dripping from its white fangs could be clearly seen. Right at this moment, a massive shadow appeared above the giant saw-toothed tiger. The giant saw-toothed tiger raised its head, and all it saw was a fat orange backside. Boom! A massive orange cat with a radius of over 5 meters came crashing down, crushing the giant saw-toothed tiger with its backside. The 4 sandstorms were also squashed like flies, and they couldn't even raise a single speck of sand. "I told you to be a good boy, and now you've been flattened." Amy heaved a forlorn sigh as she looked at the exit up ahead, and her wind fire wheels flashed as she rushed out. The entire Magus Tower tremored slightly. "What's that?" The magic casters on the 1st floor were all rather bewildered. Only a 5th-tier magic caster could unleash a spell of this caliber. It must be junior brother Cola. "He's definitely going to pass the 4th stage," the short and fat magic caster said with certainty. Cola passed the 4th stage in 80 seconds. A magic caster yelled with elation. This battle wasn't just a gamble between Richard and Crassus, it was also a battle that concerned the honor of the Magus Tower. More importantly, it represented a battle between long-range magic and melee magic, and it was a battle that had the hearts of all magic casters present. Cola had passed the final stage, so there was a chance that he could win. After all, he had far more experience than Amy. 80 seconds. She passed the 4th stage. However, almost at the exact same moment, an even sharper cry erupted from the crowd. Everyone instantly fell silent as they stared at the 80-second mark on Amy's door, as well as the bright red number on the 6th floor, and they were all extremely astonished. Within the cavernous space on the 5th floor, Cola looked at the magic beast in the distance with an excited expression as he murmured to himself, only 80 seconds have passed. If I can defeat this 5th-tier illusionary magic beast within a minute, then I'll break my own record again. When that time comes, that little brat will most likely still be struggling on the 2nd and 3rd levels. Amy emerged from the trial space on the 5th floor and appeared in a long corridor with a series of closed rooms on either side. Where's the exit? Amy was looking around when she suddenly heard the sound of something being smashed, accompanied by a faint howl of anguish, erupting from the room beside her. Chapter 709. The door slowly opened. Within the dimly lit room, a beautiful elf was holding a chair with one hand, and was about to smash it down on the fatso's head. Amy was still holding on to the door, and her mouth was slightly agape upon seeing this. She stood rooted to the spot, as if she had been petrified. Irina paused in the chair in her hand, and was also slightly taken aback at the sight of Amy standing at the door. The half-elf little girl in a purple dress appeared to be around 3 or 4 years old. Her long silver hair had been braided into 2 little braids, and she was staring at Amy with her large, bright blue eyes. Her pointy little ears twitched, and her intricate little face appeared to be very adorable, as if she were ready to run away at a moment's notice. Amy should be around this age as well. Irina was momentarily dazed before quickly coming to her senses. She had just cast a restriction spell on the door, and even a 9th-tier magic caster wouldn't be able to open it from the outside. This little girl appeared to be a little magic caster, but there was no way that she would be able to open the door. The door was opened, and Brent's eyes lit up as if hope had suddenly appeared in his gloomy life. However, he was also rooted to the spot at the sight of Amy. This wasn't President Richard. Who was this little half-elf girl? Why was she here? After hearing that the Crassus had come to wreak havoc, Brent had rushed downstairs in a hurry. However, he was knocked unconscious by a chair by Irina, who had suddenly appeared in the Magus Tower. She then dragged him into this dark room and gave him a vicious beating before interrogating him about the people involved in the assassination attempt 3 years ago. He wasn't an idiot, and he knew that he couldn't tell anyone about this. As such, he could only wait for Richard to discover the abnormal magic fluctuations in the Magus Tower before coming to save him. However, he didn't think that it would be a little half-elf girl instead of Richard. The Magus Tower only accepted human magic casters, and he didn't know how this little half-elf girl had managed to sneak in. However, she was his only hope, and he immediately yelled, "Hurry up and call for help. Save." Bam! Brent didn't even get a chance to finish his sentence before a chair crashed into his face. The chair was reduced to dust, and he swallowed the rest of his sentence. His eyes were bulging, and he was completely dizzy from the force of the blow. "Little girl, who are you? Why are you here?" Irina tossed the remaining half of the chair leg aside and looked at Amy with a smile. Amy looked at Irina with sparkling eyes. She had seen Big Sister Aisha before, but compared to Big Sister Aisha, this seemingly violent Big Sister was even more beautiful. She was like a goddess who had descended from heaven. Furthermore, she also had a head of silver hair, and her skin was as white as snow. Her pair of small pointed ears were so white and thin that they seemed to be able to pass through light. The small golden moon mark between her eyebrows seemed to be glowing, and when she looked at her with her aqua blue eyes, she felt an inexplicable sense of intimacy. However, the scene of Irina smacking the fat man in the corner on the head with a chair still shocked Amy. Who would have thought that not only was this big sister beautiful, she was also so cool? Could it be that she was also a melee magic caster? Slapping someone in the face was the most important part of melee magic that Master Crassus had taught her. As such, that scene was far too intimate. If it weren't for the fact that she knew that Master Crassus didn't have any other disciples, she would have already addressed her as senior sister. "I'm just a little elf passing by," Amy said in a feeble voice. Even though she felt very close to her, she still followed Meg's instructions to not reveal any information about herself to strangers. A little elf passing by. Irina faltered slightly before looking at Amy, who was standing in the doorway, and couldn't help but burst into laughter. It had been a long time since she had met such an interesting little girl, and she was inexplicably amused by her. A small chair appeared in her hand, and she extended an invitation to Amy as she said, "This is a bad guy, do you want to beat him up with me?" "Okay, okay." Amy nodded without any hesitation before rushing into the room excitedly. She grabbed the small chair with both hands, and mimicked Irina as she gestured toward Brent's head, as if she were trying to find a suitable angle. "You believe me so easily. Aren't you afraid that I'm a bad guy?" Irina looked at Amy, who was holding onto the small chair with a serious expression. "I'm not afraid. Father said that when two people fight, the ugly one must be the bad guy. Big sister is so beautiful, so there's no way you're a bad guy." Amy shook her head with a firm expression as she pointed at Brent, and said, "Then he must be the bad guy. Your father has a very good eye." Irina nodded, and her gloomy mood suddenly lightened up. Not only was this little girl very interesting, her father also seemed to be an interesting person, which was why he was able to say something so reasonable. Arg! Brent was still dizzy from the slap, and he had only just regained some of his senses when he caught sight of Amy, who was holding onto the small chair with both hands. "Sho!" Amy shushed him as she swung the small chair in her hand toward Brent's face. Bam! The sturdy wooden chair was almost instantly reduced to splinters, leaving only two legs in Amy's hands. Brent fell into a state of dizziness again. "You're a quick learner." Irina was just about to smash the chair into Brent's face when she looked at Amy with a hint of surprise on her face. This was a standard posture, and it was quite fitting for her. Hee hee. Amy's eyebrows curved into crescents as she laughed. She was very happy to be praised by this big sister elf, and it was a completely different feeling from being praised by her father. However, there are still areas that can be improved. For example, the angle of the chair can be tilted slightly, then raised above your head and smacked into his face at a slanted angle. Bam! See, the sound is clearer this way. Doesn't it sound more refreshing? It's true. Let me try it too. Bam! See, if you change the direction and smash it from above, there'll be a different sound. Bam! Wow! That's awesome. I want to learn it too. Bam! Bam! Bam bam! Duong! Dull thuds sounded in the dimly lit room. The duel had already become a duel, and there was even a discussion between the two of them about the angle and strength of their attacks. "He seems to have fainted." Amy looked at the unconscious Brent, whose head was as swollen as a pig's, and stuck out her little tongue as she tossed the chair leg in her hands onto the ground. "Well done, little guy." Chapter 7:10. On the first floor of the Magus Tower, everyone was still reeling from the shock brought upon by Amy's unprecedented record. In that instant, everyone felt as if they were witnessing the rise of a legendary magic caster. A 3-year-old 5th-tier magic caster who had only taken 20 seconds to reach the 5th level of the Magus Tower. No one could predict or imagine what she would become in the future. In that instant, everyone seemed to understand why Crassus and Julian had set aside their century-old feud to accept a half-elf girl as their disciple. Crassus had even severed ties with the Magus Tower and left Rodu to settle in Chaos City. If they were to miss out on an exceptional prodigy like her, they might not be able to find another one even in 1,000 years. Richard's expression was still quite restrained, but his trembling beard and tightly clenched fists indicated that he wasn't as calm as he appeared to be. The fire spirit lotus wasn't very useful to him, but it was a treasure of the same caliber as the water spirit bead, and he had prepared to exchange it for it. However, he had lost it to Crassus so easily, and the water spirit bead didn't belong to him either. All of the magic casters under Richard's command had also fallen silent. The short and stout magic caster who had been so confident about Cola's victory had already retreated to the back of the crowd, not daring to raise his head. Crassus had left the Magus Tower and returned with his disciple, giving the Magus Tower a resounding slap across the face. The Magus Tower was still the Magus Tower. All of the magic casters present had to concede. In contrast, the normal magic casters didn't feel any ill will toward Richard. After all, he was like an elder who had watched you grow up, and you couldn't possibly retaliate if he taught you a lesson. Crassus hadn't accepted a disciple for over 100 years, so no matter how much of a prodigy she was, it wasn't all that hard to accept. Furthermore, compared to Richard, who had sent his disciple to trample on the human world right after Cola had accepted a disciple, what Crassus had done wasn't completely out of line. "Cola is coming out soon, go get them," Richard instructed in a slightly hoarse voice. "Yes." A tall and thin magic caster nodded before quickly departing. "I'll go get Amy," Meg said to Crassus and quickly followed the tall and thin magician. He was not used to not having Amy in his sight, and this was the magician's tower. Crassus nodded slightly, then looked at Richard with a smile. He extended his hand and said, "Now, the fire spirit lotus is mine." "Humph." Richard harumphed coldly as he turned to Crassus, and said, "I don't know what trick she's using to get to the top of the tower, but seeing as she's already succeeded, do you dare to face Cola in battle? Other than the fire spirit lotus, I'll also bet a flame amber spirit crystal." Crassus's eyes lit up. "Really?" Richard took his hand out of his wide sleeve, and a box emitting a fiery red light appeared in his palm. He opened the box, and a red amber-like crystal appeared in his hand. Inside the crystal, a small red dragon was swimming slowly as if it had a mind of its own. "All right, I'll take the bet." Crassus immediately nodded as he looked at the crystal in Richard's hand. The flame amber spirit crystal was a supreme-grade cultivation material for fire-type magic casters, and it was even more valuable than the fire spirit lotus. However, it only existed in the lava of volcanoes that had been active for tens of thousands of years, and almost no one had ever seen it before. It was something that only existed in legends. Who would have thought that a water-type magic caster like Richard would have one? Richard stowed the flame amber spirit crystal away before turning to Crassus. "I don't know what tricks you used to help her succeed, but it's better to take things slowly and steadily. She's made 5 breakthroughs in 2 months, and her foundation isn't even stable yet. What combat prowess does she have?" Amy looked at Irina, and suddenly recalled what her father had said to her the night before in Rodu. This big sister elf didn't appear to be a bad person, but if she were to tell the truth, her father would definitely scold her. Thus, she thought for a moment before replying with a smile, "My name is Irina." "Little Amy." Irina's eyes immediately lit up. She suddenly recalled how she had returned to the elven race just before she was about to give birth, and when she had asked him what name he was going to give her, he had smiled and said, "Let's call her Amy." After that, he had given her a nickname, Little Amy. He had silver hair, bright blue eyes, small pointy ears, and a slightly round face that resembled Alex's features. His facial features resembled hers, especially when he smiled. She felt as if she were seeing the shadow of that person in his eyes. That was the man who always wore a stoic expression in front of others, but who often smiled like a child in front of her. No, it can't be her. This is Rodu, this is the Magus Tower. How could she be here? Irina felt as if her heart had been constricted, and she was constantly telling herself this in her mind. However, as she looked at Amy, she couldn't help but overlap the image of Amy in her mind with the image of Amy in her mind. However, she still couldn't help but extend her hand toward Amy's face. Her slender fingers stroked the baby fat on her cheeks, and she faltered momentarily as she murmured, I didn't think that you would be so tender. Father said that if I wash my face with milk often, my face will become tender. Amy rubbed her face against Irina's hand, and her eyes narrowed as she smiled like an adorable kitten. How could she be so adorable? Irina looked at Amy, who was rubbing against her hand, and felt as if her heart were about to melt. She was suddenly struck by the urge to steal this child away. Who cares whose child she is? I'll just steal her home first. In the future, if I'm in a bad mood, I'll take her out and play with her every day. It'll definitely be much more fun than raising goldfish. No, that's not the main point right now. Irina shook her head as she tried to dispel the strange thoughts in her mind. She composed herself, and stroked Amy's face with an affectionate expression as she asked, Amy, who's your father? Where's your mother? Amy, who was comfortably rubbing against Irina's hand, opened her eyes and glanced at her. Then she closed her eyes again. Could this big sister be the strange uncle that father mentioned? After asking for my name, she started asking for information about my father and mother, and then stole me away. My father is a super awesome chef. Most people call him Mr. Mac. His boss is super awesome, and the food he cooks is also super delicious. Amy opened her eyes and said with a smile, my mother is on the moon. She's looking at me from the sky right now. Mr. Mac. Meg. Amy. Irina's eyes gradually widened, and she felt as if something was forming a clear line in her mind. Amy. Chapter 7:11. It's father. Amy's eyes immediately lit up as she looked at Irina. Her mind was already racing as she thought to herself, if mother can't come back from the moon, then father will be quite lonely. Should I find him a new wife? I thought Teacher Luna was a good choice, but father might prefer the beautiful elf big sister. That elf big sister is so beautiful, so father would definitely like her, right? That doesn't sound like him. Irina looked toward the door with furrowed brows. She then stroked Amy's cheek with a serious expression as she said, Amy, I have to go now. Don't tell anyone that you saw me here, and that you didn't beat up that fatso. Okay. Amy nodded obediently. For some reason, she couldn't help but feel a sense of familiarity toward this big sister elf. She looked at Irina, who was about to leave, and whispered, by the way, what's your name, beautiful big sister elf? I'm Irina. I'll be back for you. Irina smiled as she turned and stomped a foot onto Brent's face, leaving a delicate footprint on it. Golden light flashed beneath her feet, and a small teleportation formation appeared, upon which she disappeared from the room in the blink of an eye. Amy. Meg pushed open the half-closed door, and saw Amy standing in the dimly lit room with a fat man with a swollen face curled up in the corner. He quickly walked in, picked Amy up, and worriedly asked, Are you all right? Are you hurt? Master Brent. Roy, who had arrived with Meg, exclaimed as he rushed into the room. He rushed over to the fatso in just a few steps, and tried to help him up. However, he didn't know where to start at the sight of the fatso's swollen face and curled-up body. He turned to Amy with a wary expression as he asked, Did you injure Master Brent? Brent. Meg's eyes narrowed slightly upon hearing this. He hadn't been able to recognize that the man who had been pummeled into a pulp was Brent. He was a 10th-tier great magic caster in the Magus Tower, who would dare to beat him up like this? Who was it that had such powerful strength? What had happened here? A series of questions welled up in Meg's mind as he searched through his memories. However, aside from Crassus, he couldn't find anyone else who had the power and courage to do this. Meg also turned to Amy. Perhaps Amy had seen something. Amy shrugged with an innocent expression as she said, I saw the door was open, and I thought it was the exit. I was just passing by. Roy looked at Amy, then at Brent. That made sense. Master Brent was a 10th tier great magic caster, and no matter how freakish this little girl was, there was no way she could have beaten Master Brent into such a sorry state. However, who else on the entire continent aside from Master Crassus would dare to beat Master Brent into such a sorry state in the Magus Tower? Crassus was still on the first floor of the Magus Tower, so this clearly had nothing to do with him. Who had broken into the Magus Tower? A sense of peril welled up in Roy's heart. If someone had managed to break into the Magus Tower and beat Master Brent into a pulp right in front of everyone's eyes, then who would feel safe in the Magus Tower? He had to report this to President Richard right away. Seeing as this has nothing to do with you, then go downstairs right away. Roy stood up and gestured for Meg and Amy to leave the room. He then followed them out of the room, preparing to summon 2 more magic casters to carry Brent downstairs. He had to get the healing magic casters to treat Brent's injuries as soon as possible. This sandstorm python was a little more difficult to deal with than I expected. However, it only took me 2 minutes, which is around 10 seconds faster than the last time. A new record has been set. Cola, really was born to break through towers. Cola looked at the sandstorm python that had been reduced to a pile of sand, and he stepped into the exit with a smile. That little brat is most likely still in the maze on the 2nd floor. What a boring opponent. White light flashed, and Cola landed on the ground with a triumphant smile on his face. He was sure that he would be praised by his senior brothers and sisters for a long time again for this record. However, he opened his eyes, and was immediately rooted to the spot that he was greeted by. The little brat who was supposed to be on the 2nd floor was holding her father's hand as they walked out of the room across the street. Is this real? Cola closed his eyes before reopening them to find that Amy was still holding onto Meg's hand. Aside from them, senior brother Roy had also emerged from the room. How is this possible? Cola's eyes widened with shock. Amy had also appeared on the 6th floor. Could it be that she had also successfully broken through the tower? And she was even faster than him. That's impossible. There's no way anyone could be faster than me. Cola shook his head as he looked at Roy. A smile appeared on his face as he said, "Senior brother Roy, you must have rescued this little brat from the 5th floor of the tower, right? You've come out, Cola." She reached the 5th floor of the tower on her own, and it only took her 80 seconds. Roy took a glance at Cola, and quickly said, "Hurry up and go downstairs." He then walked past Cola and quickly left. Compared to the attack on Brent, this was nothing. 80 seconds. Roy's words were like a sledgehammer blow to Cola's head, and all of his confidence was instantly shattered. He had broken his own tower ascension record on multiple occasions, and he was hailed as a prodigy by everyone. In fact, he even had hopes of catching up to the elven princess. He was an extremely proud person, but he had been defeated by a little brat who was only 3 or 4 years old. This was like a bolt out of the blue to him. "Did you only just come out, big cabbage? I've been playing for a while now. You have to keep working hard in the future so that I don't have to wait too long." Amy looked at Cola with a smile. I. Cola clasped a hand over his heart as he stumbled back a couple of steps. He felt as if his heart had been punctured. Let's go. Meg held onto Amy's hand as they made their way down the stairs. After turning a corner in the hallway, Meg picked up Amy, and asked in a quiet voice, "Amy, what did you just see?" Roy didn't connect this incident to Amy, but he had seen something peculiar in Amy's expression, and he knew that Amy was definitely hiding something. Amy looked around before leaning over to Meg, and whispering into his ear, "Father, I saw a super beautiful big sister beating up a bad guy, and she even invited me to join her. She really is a super beautiful big sister." super beautiful big sister. Meg faltered slightly upon hearing this, and a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. Aside from Crassus, there was someone else in this world who had the guts and ability to beat up Brent in the Magus Tower without being discovered. Chapter 7:12. Meg looked at Amy. He already knew the answer, but he still wanted to hear Amy's answer. It was very likely that they had just met for the first time, and they had even joined forces to beat Brent up. This was a little too exciting. He had envisioned some scenes where they would meet, and he had even considered asking the system to create a simulated moon so that Amy wouldn't think that he had lied to her. As expected, Father's eyes lit up at the mention of a super beautiful elf. Amy blinked before whispering into Meg's ear. She said, "Her name is Irina, but she told me to keep this a secret, so I only told you, Father." As expected. Meg was feeling a little conflicted. The answer was within his expectations, but it still dealt him a heavy blow. Emotionally speaking, Alex had erased all his memories and emotions about Irina. Therefore, Irina was no different from a stranger to him who he had only heard of a few things and names. Meg had transmigrated from the modern world, so he naturally wasn't going to take emotional matters for granted. That would be unfair to both of them. However, she was still Amy's mother, and that was something that couldn't be ignored no matter what. Meg still didn't know what Irina was like, and he still hadn't thought about how he was going to interact with her. In his eyes, there was no way that they would meet before he recovered his powers as a 10th tier knight. He didn't think that Irina would also be in Rodu, and that she would coincidentally meet Amy. Father. Father. Are you thinking about big sister Irina? Amy waved a hand in front of Meg's face as she looked at him. Meg came to his senses, and asked, "Did you tell her your name? Did she say anything else to you?" "I told her that my name was Irina. Big sister Irina said that she would come to look for me again, so I'll introduce her to you then." Amy blinked her big eyes, waiting for a compliment. It seems that she has guessed something. Meg's feelings became even more complicated. If it were possible, he would naturally want Amy to reunite with Irina and let her know who her mother was so that she could receive motherly love as soon as possible. However, it was the king's birthday, and all of the races had come to offer their blessings. There were all sorts of people in Rodu, and Sean and Josh were like venomous snakes waiting for an opportunity to strike. Countless eyes were fixed on Irina. Once his identity was exposed, it was very likely that he would have to face the same situation as 3 years ago. Even Alex wasn't able to protect Amy all those years ago, so how was Irina going to be able to leave Rodu on her own? Meg didn't want to experience the same thing twice. However, how could he bear to see Amy and Irina miss each other again? The image of Amy murmuring "mother" in her sleep was still etched in his mind. He had experienced the feeling of being ignored before, so he knew what it was like to yearn for something. What should I do? Meg felt as if there had been a dead knot in his heart, and he couldn't think of a way to resolve it. You should call her Auntie, Meg said to Amy. He couldn't mess up their relationship too much. Father, big sister won't like you if you do that. Amy shook her head as she looked at Meg and said, Big sister will always be big sister. If you call her Auntie, then she won't like you. Meg opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say. He didn't think that Amy would be so clever when it came to women. However, if she didn't know that Irina was her mother, then why was she still trying to introduce her to him? Amy seemed to have read Meg's mind, and she continued, Father, the moon is so far away, won't it be very difficult for us to save Mother? In that case, I think it'll be too lonely for you to be alone at home when I go to school. Should I find you a wife? That way, she can accompany you when I go to school. Then, when I'm done, I can let her get off work and I'll accompany you. I think big sister Irina is pretty good. Isn't she your biological mother? Meg silently rolled his eyes. He felt helpless towards this little lowly who was trying to matchmake her father with his biological mother. He finally understood why the little girl was so enthusiastic. Although he wanted to laugh at Amy's naive idea of a wife to get off work after school, he was more touched. The little girl was afraid that he would be lonely, so she put aside her mother, whom she couldn't forget. "What do you think?" "Father, isn't my idea great?" Amy looked at Meg expectantly. "And, in that case, there will be someone to help Father cook and wash his clothes, so Father won't have to work so hard." "Little girl, we've only met for the first time, and you've already arranged everything." Meg smiled and tapped Amy's forehead with his finger. According to the information he had collected about Irina during this time, Amy's idea was obviously too naive. Her Royal Highness was obviously not a woman who would quietly stay in the kitchen to cook and wash clothes. Moreover, he couldn't afford it. Meg looked around and said softly and seriously, "Amy, you're not allowed to tell anyone other than me that you've met big sister Irina, okay?" Amy looked at Meg and nodded with a serious expression. "Okay, don't worry, Father. I'll never introduce her to anyone else." "Good luck. What's in that little head of yours?" Meg couldn't help but laugh, but he didn't continue to talk about this matter. He carried Amy downstairs. All he could do now was to take things one step at a time. He could only hope that the princess was smart enough to act and reunite with her daughter as soon as possible. Meg carried Amy down to the first floor, and all of the magic casters parted to create a path for them. Some of them were looking at Amy with resentment, while others were looking at her with elation. "Make way! Make way!" Right at this moment, Roy rushed out of the exit with two magic casters carrying Brent on a stretcher, and a panicked expression appeared on his face as he yelled, "President!" Master Brent was attacked and severely wounded. All of the magic casters immediately erupted into an uproar at the sight of Brent's swollen face. What happened? Richard was also slightly startled to hear this, and he hurried over to Brent. Brent had been attacked in the Magus Tower, and he had been beaten to such a sorry state. What was even more unsettling to him was that he hadn't even noticed anything. "Hi Tay, wake him up." Richard's expression darkened slightly. A magic caster of average stature stepped forward and unleashed a healing spell. Green light enshrouded Brent's body, and a normal color slowly returned to Brent's face. Chapter 7:13. What's wrong with Elder Brent? Why is he in such a sorry state? It looks like he was smashed in the face with a chair, but with Elder Brent's powers, how could he have been smashed in the face with a chair? Could it be that Elder Brent likes to grope female magic casters, and someone plotted against him for revenge? He deserves it. If I were him, I'd also want to smack that old pervert in the face with a chair. All of the magic casters were stunned to see Brent in such a sorry state, but most of them were gloating over his misfortune. Some of the female magic casters were even cursing him with resentment. That was a really good slap to the face. Even my anger has been vented. Crassus was elated as he looked at Brent's face. Just as everyone was discussing among themselves, Brent woke up, and his reflexive reaction to the sight of Amy made the entire first floor of the Magus Tower fall silent. All of the magic casters were staring at Amy, who was holding Meg's hand, with incredulity on their faces. Could it be that Amy was the one who had beaten Master Brent to such a state? Brent was a 10th-tier great magic caster. No matter how much of a prodigy Amy was, she was still only a 5th-tier magic caster, and there was an insurmountable gulf between her and a great magic caster. Kola, who had just made his way downstairs in a dejected manner, was also rooted to the spot upon seeing this. If even Master Brent had been beaten to such a state by this little brat, then what kind of disparity was there between them? "Little Amy, did you really beat up that fatso?" Crassus turned to Amy with a hint of surprise in his eyes. He wasn't blaming her in the slightest. Instead, there was a hint of anticipation in his eyes. Richard took a glance at Amy, and his brows furrowed slightly. There were very few people in this world who could beat up Brent in the Magus Tower without him noticing, but this little half-elf brat clearly wasn't one of them. He turned to Brent with a cold expression and asked, "Brent, what happened?" Brent shuddered as he hugged his head with his eyes closed. He looked up at Richard and all of the magic casters around him, and only then did he realize that he was no longer in that dark room. He heaved a huge sigh of relief as he collapsed onto the ground. He looked up at Richard in a feeble manner and said, "That woman. That woman came to Rodu. Shut up." A dangerous light flashed through Richard's eyes as he cut Brent off before turning to Amy. "What does this have to do with her?" Brent realized that he had said something that he shouldn't have, and he shrank back as he looked at Amy. The image of her raising a chair high into the air before smacking it into his face flashed through his mind, and his voice became a little shrill as he said, "That little brat hit me. She smacked me in the face with a chair." "No, I didn't." "You're lying." Amy shook her head as she denied Brent's accusation 3 times in a row. She then put on an aggrieved expression as she said, "She's just a little elf who happened to be passing by. You must have been beaten, silly." Compared to Brent's swollen face, Amy's words were clearly more convincing. Who would believe that such an adorable little girl would smack someone in the face with a chair? Furthermore, an elder of the Magus Tower, a 10th-tier magic caster, was claiming that he had been knocked out by a little girl who wasn't even 4 years old. This was a blatant slander. All of the magic casters were already beginning to feel quite enraged. They could accept losing to someone else in the Magus Tower, but they still cared about their reputation. Brent's actions were a complete disgrace to the Magus Tower, and they were the most brainless type. "That's enough, Brent. I told you to drink less, but it looks like you drank too much this morning and knocked yourself silly." Richard's expression was also rather strained as he turned to Roy and said, "Take him back to rest." Brent opened his mouth, but he swallowed his words in the face of a vicious glare from Richard, and he could only swallow his grievances. He took a glance at Crassus, and a chill ran down his spine as he suddenly recalled who this half-elf brat was. Crassus' disciple was none other than a little half-elf brat who was less than 4 years old. But Roy wanted to say something. He had discovered the unconscious Brent in the corner of the room, and there were wooden splinters and broken wooden chairs all over the ground beside him. This didn't look like something he would have done in a drunken stupor. However, he swallowed his words at the sight of Richard's expression, and prepared to leave with the 2 magic casters. Amy turned to Meg with a smug smile on her face. Meg also patted her head with a smile on his face. She really was a clever little brat. She was already using her advantage to her advantage. Who would have thought that Master Brent would be such a person? Could it be that he's trying to frame that little girl because she beat Hank? That's right. I heard that Hank used a sealing spell during their duel, but was still defeated by her in a direct confrontation. After that, he was crippled by Master Crassus, and he got what he deserved. Who would have thought that Brent would want to avenge him? As expected of a master and disciple, they're both the same. All of the magic casters looked at Meg with disgust in their eyes as they discussed quietly among themselves. All of their disgust for Brent had suddenly erupted. Hold on. Right at this moment, Crassus suddenly made his way over to Brent with a smile on his face. He looked at Brent, who was lying on the stretcher, and clicked his tongue in wonder as he said, "There aren't many people in this world who can beat a chair into such a beautiful state. You're like a work of art, and you didn't leave me any room to strike. What a pity, what a pity." Brent was clearly trembling as he lay on the stretcher, and cold sweat was pouring down his forehead. He endured the pain and forced a smile onto his face as he said, "Master Crassus, I heard that you were here, and I came downstairs in a hurry. I accidentally tripped and fell, and I didn't come to greet you as soon as I could. Please forgive me for that. Hi. Aw. Ow ow ow, ow ow. You're pretty thick-skinned, aren't you? Your skin is almost as thick as the city walls of Rodu. You're still hurting from just a light pinch. Crassus pinched a large chunk of Brent's flesh before twisting it to the side with a wide smile on his face. Brent's face had turned completely pale, and cold sweat was pouring down his face. He was on the verge of fainting, but he still forced a smile onto his face as he said in a sobbing voice, It doesn't hurt, it doesn't hurt. Then do you think I'm old and weak? Crassus tightened his grip even more, and Brent's already swollen face was almost twisted out of shape. Arf! Brent's sharp howls of anguish erupted throughout the entire Magus Tower. That's enough. Crassus, this is the Magus Tower, not a place for you to do as you please. Richard raised a hand, and a massive blue hand materialized from water grabbed toward Crassus' hand. Shut up. Crassus waved a hand through the air to vanquish the massive hand that was hurtling toward him. He then slapped Brent across the face with a wail of anguish. Brent's screams came to an abrupt halt, and he fell unconscious again as he lay on the stretcher with his head tilted to the side. Chapter 7:14. Richard took a meaningful glance at Crassus before turning to the dejected Cola, and said, Cola, I order you to engage in a duel with her. Defeat is not an option. Really? Cola's eyes immediately lit up with excitement. He firmly believed that with Amy's powers, she really was able to clear the tower in less than a minute. Crassus had to have taught her some special tower climbing techniques, and he was sure that she had cheated. However, if they were to engage in a fair and square duel, he was confident that he would be able to secure victory and regain the dignity that he had lost. Crassus also turned to Amy with a smile, and said, Little Amy, you're going to have to fight him later. Don't hold back, just hit him with all your might. Sure, sure. Amy nodded. Then, she scanned the surroundings as if she was looking for something. Richard waved a hand through the air, and a white circle with a radius of 10 meters appeared on the center of the first floor of the Magus Tower. He said with a serious expression, This will be the boundary for this duel. Those who fall out of the white circle and are unable to resist will lose. Little brat, I'm going to show you what a true 5th-tier magic caster is like. Cola glowered at Amy before walking into the circle as he yelled, Magus Tower, Cola. Found it. Amy let go of Meg's hand before skipping over to the reception desk at the entrance of the Magus Tower. She then picked up a small chair before skipping back into the circle as she leaned on the chair with one hand. Amy, Mamis. What's Mamis? Is it a restaurant? Or a mysterious organization? But why did she bring a chair here? And it's a foldable chair. Is she planning to use it as a weapon? Could it be that the wound on Master Brent's face really was inflicted by a chair? All the magicians looked at this scene with curiosity on their faces. This advertisement really doesn't feel out of place. Meg nodded approvingly. As the spokesperson for Amy did not forget her identity at all times. But speaking of which, perhaps he could consider advertising operations when he got back. It was still a little slow to make money from just one restaurant, and expansion had to be put on the agenda as soon as possible. However, the way that Amy was leaning on her foldable chair and appraising Cola in an old-fashioned manner reminded Tang Wulin of Sardras. Was she really going to hit that little boy with her chair? The foldable chair can be used anywhere in a fight, and it's a powerful weapon. You're able to use it locally instead of being restricted to a mage's staff. As expected of my disciple, Crassus. Crassus nodded approvingly. He had no objection to Amy choosing a chair over her staff. Cola looked at the chair in Amy's hands with furrowed brows. You're not going to use your wand. Master said that as long as you have magic in your heart, everything can be a weapon. Why do I have to use a wand? I think a chair is fine. Amy shrugged with a perplexed look on her face. Insolent fool. Cola's fury gradually intensified. This little brat was looking down on him completely. This big cabbage is so strange. Why is he so angry that I'm using a chair? Amy looked at Cola with a perplexed expression before shaking her head. Forget it. I just learned a special technique from Big Sister Irina to hit someone with a chair. Let's try it on his face first. Richard's expression darkened slightly as he looked at the chair in Amy's hands. This little brat was just like Crassus, completely disrespecting the Magus Tower. However, that didn't matter. She wasn't even 4 years old yet, there was no way that she could defeat Cola with a chair. Thus, he yelled, just attack with all your might. If there's any danger, we'll intervene. However, if we intervene, the side being protected will be deemed to have lost. Now, let the battle begin. Cola held a bluish-silver wand in his hand, and he looked at Amy with a cold smile as he said, Remember, little brat, my name is Cola. I think Big Cabbage sounds better. Amy thought to herself for a moment before shaking her head. You! Cola's face immediately flushed with rage. Is it starting? Then I'm going to start now. Amy looked at Cola as she slowly raised the chair in her hand. Even though Cola suffered a crushing defeat in the tower battle, I think he still has a chance of winning. That's not necessarily the case. Melee magic casters are invincible in melee combat, and the circle isn't very large. I think Amy has a better chance of winning. A chair-wielding magic caster versus a wand-wielding magic caster, this is a very rare battle. All of the magic casters wore expectant looks on their faces. No one had witnessed the tower battle, so no one knew just how powerful Amy was. As such, it was still unknown who would emerge victorious in this battle. Come, I only need one spell to defeat you. Cola looked at Amy with a disdainful expression as he struck a pose that he thought was cool and dashing as he pointed the wand in his hand at Amy. His pose had only just been completed when the back of a chair appeared before him before crashing into his face at a speed that he was completely unable to evade. 3 magic barriers appeared in quick succession, but they were all shattered by the ordinary-looking wooden chair. No! A cry of surprise rang out as the wooden chair crashed into Cola's face. Bam! A crisp crack rang out as wooden chips flew through the air. Cola was sent flying backward, and he only came to a stop after sliding across the ground for a while. The left side of his face was already severely swollen. Wah! All of the magic casters who were looking forward to an exciting battle were completely dumbstruck. The battle had only just begun when 2 balls of fire suddenly appeared beneath Amy's feet. She then instantly appeared before Cola and sent him flying with a single swipe of her chair. I'm suddenly starting to believe Elder Brent's words. A magic caster swallowed nervously. With such speed and power, even a 7th-tier magic caster would most likely be injured if they were caught off guard. All of the magic casters nearby nodded in agreement. But is Cola going to lose just like that? All of the magic casters looked at Cola with complex emotions. If news of him being defeated in a single attack were to spread, the Magus Tower would be completely humiliated. Cola was also completely dumbstruck. The scorching pain on the left side of his face was constantly reminding him that this was not a dream, but in that instant, he really wanted to believe that this was just a nightmare. Being sent flying by a chair from a tiny little thing was simply too difficult for him to accept. Cola, do you want to continue lying there like this? Richard roared with rage. Cola shuddered as he rose to his feet. He took a glance at the cold expression on Richard's face, and a hint of unease welled up in his heart. He then turned to Amy and didn't waste any more words. He pointed his wand forward while chanting an incantation. A giant blue python quickly took shape in front of him before pouncing toward Amy with its mouth wide open. Chapter 7:15. When the anaconda appeared, most of the magic casters present thought that the battle had taken a huge turn for the better. The giant anaconda that Cola had conjured was already displaying the power of a 5th-tier spell. However, a round orange ball then fell from the sky. It crushed the blue anaconda and knocked Cola unconscious. The outcome had been decided. Everything fell silent again. The only things that remained were a massive orange cat that resembled a giant ball, and Cola, who was foaming at the mouth beneath the giant cat. Holy fuck, after a long while, a magic caster finally found the right word to express his feelings. Meow. Ugly Duckling stared at the massive ball in Meg's hand, then looked down at its belly, which was gradually becoming round. It took a deep breath and tried to shrink its belly a little. As expected, this is the correct way to unleash an orange cat's innate talent. Meg was also in awe. Thankfully, it wasn't his main body that had fallen from the sky. After a long period of silence, the crowd suddenly erupted into an uproar. All of the magic casters were discussing the science behind the use of fantasy empowerment. This was like a one-time use spell. If it didn't land on its target, then the spell would be completely useless. However, if it did land on its target, then a 5th-tier magic caster's magic and body clearly wouldn't be able to withstand such a simple and brutal attack. Crassus turned to Richard with a wide smile on his face. Richard, your disciple can't move anymore. In that case, Amy should have won, right? Give me my fire spirit lotus and flame spirit crystal. After being humiliated 3 times in a row, Richard's expression was extremely dark. He flipped his hand over, and the fire spirit lotus and flame spirit crystal appeared in his hand. He tossed them toward Crassus with a cold smile on his face. All you've learned is trickery. Let's see what kind of disciple you're going to teach in the future. Crassus caught the 2 spirit items with a wave of his hand. He took a glance at them, and the smile on his face widened even further. He stowed them away with a smile, and said, "Isn't it obvious? Of course, I still have to thank you for these 2 fire-type spiritual items. That's right, I'm a genius who can easily beat the Magus Tower." Richard turned to Crassus with an enraged expression. Crassus, you've spent several decades in the Magus Tower, yet you're opposing our Magus Tower at every turn. Are you really not going to give us any face? I, Crassus, have never been a person who cares about feelings. I only care about reason. Crassus glanced at the mages present and grinned. Also, I have a habit. If my things are damaged by others, I will destroy them and make a new one. Everyone fell silent. All the magicians had complicated expressions on their faces. Richard's lips twitched, but he didn't say anything in the end. Amy walked back and pinched Ugly Duckling's face with a serious expression as she said, "Ugly Duckling, did you see that? If you keep eating, you'll become like this. When that happens, I'll have no choice but to throw you out and smash you into bad people." Meow. Ugly Duckling shuddered as it imagined itself becoming a ball and being thrown out by Amy, and it shook its head with an aggrieved expression. "Little Amy, Mr. Mac, let's go." Crassus turned and made his way over to Meg and the others. He gave Amy a thumbs up, and praised her with a benevolent smile. "Good job, little Amy." Crassus and the others departed from the Magus Tower. A hint of exhaustion appeared on Richard's face as he waved a hand, and said, "You can all go now." A blue ribbon of water gently swept up Cola, and he disappeared from the hole. As expected of the god of fire, Master Crassus isn't going to destroy the Magus Tower, is he? If I'm not mistaken, all of the young magic casters of this generation are going to be crushed by this little half-elf magic caster. He's not just crushing, he's crushing them. He's crushing his peers. His peers are still learning how to walk. All of the magic casters dispersed, but those who were familiar with them were still discussing the battle that had just taken place. Even though it was only a battle between two fifth-tier magic casters, it could very well decide the future of the magic world for the next several decades or even centuries. Brent had only just woken up from being slapped unconscious by Crassus, and he was greeted by the sight of Richard standing beside his bed. He hurriedly sat up. What happened? Richard's brows furrowed. Just a while ago. Brent gave Richard a recount of what had happened, and he hesitated momentarily before leaving out the part where he had been slapped by Amy. As a great magic caster, it would be far too embarrassing if he were to be slapped in the face by a 4-year-old half-elf kid with a chair. Richard's brows furrowed even further upon hearing this. Who would have thought that Irina would come to our Magus Tower to denounce us as soon as she arrived at Rodu? Looks like she already knows that we have something to do with this. Brent was a little panicked as he said, President, what should we do now? Irina is simply too powerful. Aside from you, no one in our Magus Tower is a match for her. If she were to launch a sneak attack like she did today, no one would be able to survive. She didn't kill you, which means that she still doesn't know who was involved in what happened back then. Furthermore, this is Rodu, not the Wind Forest. She can't kill members of our Magus Tower just because she wants to. If she really wants to harm our Magus Tower, then even if we kill her in Rodu, the elven race won't be able to do anything to us. Richard wasn't flustered in the slightest. You're saying... Brent's eyes lit up upon hearing this. Richard didn't continue Brent's sentence. Instead, he said, send someone to inform His Highness of Irina's arrival at Rodu. Perhaps His Highness will know how to deal with her. All right. Brent hurriedly nodded before getting up from his bed and staggering out of the room. Your Highness, you were the one who caused all of this, so you have to be the one to resolve it. Our Magus Tower won't take the blame for this. Richard disappeared from the room. The horse-drawn carriage departed from the Magus Tower and traveled through a small alleyway toward Rodu's renowned northern food district. Master, wasn't that super awesome? Amy asked as she turned to Crassus with an elated expression. Little Amy, that chair smack just then was truly a masterpiece of mine. Crassus nodded with a smug expression as he stroked his beard. TSK, I didn't learn that chair smack technique from Master. Amy shook her head. You didn't learn it from me. Then who did you learn it from? Crassus raised an eyebrow. Did that old bastard Julian teach Amy melee magic? Bam! Right at this moment, a dull thump erupted outside the carriage, and it abruptly came to a halt. Did I hit you a little too hard? Chapter 7:16. The horse-drawn carriage suddenly came to a halt as if it had crashed into something. Meg wrapped his arms around Amy and looked warily at the curtains of the carriage. From the sound of it, the horse-drawn carriage driver had already been knocked out, so he was most likely up to no good. What's that sound? Crassus' brows furrowed slightly. With Amy in Meg's arms, Ugly Duckling, which had been sprawled on the seat, was thrown off of the seat by inertia before rolling out of the carriage curtains. It's big sister Irina. Amy exclaimed in surprise upon hearing the sound, and she immediately lifted the curtains of the carriage. Irina. Meg turned toward the curtains of the carriage. An elf in a white dress was standing in front of the horse-drawn carriage, and she was pinching Ugly Duckling, which had curled up into a ball and was trembling uncontrollably. She was inspecting it with a curious expression on her beautiful face. The warm autumn sun shone down on her, and it was as if a golden veil had been draped over her body. Her long silver hair was casually draped over her back, and it fluttered slightly in the autumn wind, making her look like a celestial maiden who had just descended from the heavens. There was a golden crescent moon on her glabella, and it added a hint of holiness to her appearance. She was like the first snowflake in winter, and the first drop of dew on a flower petal made Meg's heart skip a beat. Could this be the feeling of falling in love with someone? Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. Alex's memories didn't affect him in the slightest, and this was the first time that this beautiful elf had entered his world. She was like a wisp of spring wind that stirred up a river. Irina stared at Ugly Duckling for a while with a serious expression, and said, "It's already as fat as a ball. If we stew it, it should be enough to fill a pot, right?" Amy hurriedly shook her head with a serious expression, and said, "No, we can't stew it yet. Big sister Irina, Ugly Duckling will grow into a swan in the future. I heard from father that roast goose is super delicious." Irina looked at Ugly Duckling with a skeptical expression and said, "Is that so? This ball can grow into a swan. Is the roast goose really delicious?" Yes. Father said that the little match girl forgot to go home for dinner because she was too engrossed in watching the roast goose. As a result, she starved to death outside the roast goose restaurant. The roast goose must be very, very delicious. Amy nodded. Irina nodded thoughtfully. If that's the case, then let's keep it for a while longer. Amy took Ugly Duckling back from Irina and hugged it. Meow, meow, Ugly Duckling lowered its head and let out an aggrieved cry. Why did it have to endure such pressure at such a young age? Meg face-bombed. There was no need to doubt it. This was definitely his biological mother. Even their way of thinking was exactly the same. Little Irina, so it's really you. No wonder your voice sounded so familiar. Crassus wore a wide smile on his face as he winked at Irina. You were the one who beat up Brent in the Magus Tower, right? That's right, white-bearded old man. Long time no see. Irina nodded at Crassus. She clenched her fists and said, I beat up that damn fatty every time I see him. Now that we're in Rodu, I'm going to beat him up to make myself happy. I also think that beating up that damn fatty is very satisfying. That slap this morning really made me feel good. Crassus nodded in agreement. However, he then asked, but how do you know little Amy? Little Amy. Irina's eyes lit up. Her name was Amy, and her nickname was Amy. She had silver hair and blue eyes. Was this really just a coincidence? Meg looked at Irina, and countless ideas flashed through his mind. However, he just couldn't come up with a foolproof plan. Even Amy couldn't forget her mother, so it didn't take much for him to guess just how much Irina missed Amy. He really couldn't bear to let them miss each other again. Irina looked up at Meg, and there seemed to be light flashing in her bright blue eyes. She was trying to find the face of the person she had been thinking about day and night. This man with a mustache could be considered to be quite handsome, but his appearance was completely different from Alex's. Even his black eyes didn't resemble Alex's at all. Alex's eyes weren't like that. Eyes didn't lie, they were the windows to one's soul. The only thing that could be considered similar was their height. However, Alex was slightly more muscular. Is he really Alex? Or has he completely hidden himself in order to hide his identity? Countless questions flashed through Irina's mind, and she averted her gaze with difficulty. She looked at Crassus with a relaxed expression and said, Xiaomi and I didn't know each other until we fought. Xiaomi also helped me when I beat up that fatso. Amy nodded with elation. That's right. Look, Master Crassus, I didn't learn how to hit people with a chair from you. I learned it from Big Sister Irina. By the way, Big Sister Irina, did you knock out our coachman with a chair as well? Amy looked at the coachman lying on the ground, as well as the wooden splinters all over the ground, and asked with a confused expression. Well, I thought too highly of him. Irina looked at the coachman and stuck out her little tongue in an embarrassed manner. We're going to the Rinha Food Street, but we don't have a coachman. What should we do now? Amy was a little concerned. Irina's eyes lit up. The food street. I want to go there as well, but I need someone to drive the coachman. Everyone then turned to Meg in unison. Irina looked at Meg, and she recalled the first time she had met Alex. She then ordered with a stern expression, I am the fairy princess Irina. I order you to be my coachman and take us to the Rinha Food Street. I want to refuse this order, but why do I feel a sense of joy? Meg was suddenly struck by a series of complex emotions. He felt like these words were strangely familiar. Could it be that he had a fetish for queens? Or was he a masochist? No, no. It can't be like that. It has to be an S. Ah. Meg shook these strange thoughts out of his mind as he spread open his hands in a resigned manner. I'm a chef, not a coachman. So you don't want to be my coachman? Irina looked into Meg's eyes. Of course not. Father's coachman is very good. Hurry up and get in the car, big sister Irina. She nudged Meg's arm with her elbow and whispered into his ear, Father, no big sister will like you if you act like this. Meg nodded. Then, he turned to Meg and said, Father, no big sister will like you like this. Meg looked at Amy and opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say. Chapter 7:17. So it really is you, Alex. Irina took a meaningful look at Meg before boarding the horse-drawn carriage and sitting beside Amy. She had heard the same answer 10 years ago, and it was still the same answer 10 years later. Aside from him, there was no one else. Meg lifted the unconscious coachman onto the horse-drawn carriage and said, he can still be resuscitated. Can you revive him and make him faint? That way, he'll be able to take us back with him when we go back. Otherwise, it'll be difficult for us to explain ourselves. Half dead. All right. Irina nodded before pointing a finger at the horse-drawn carriage driver. A speck of green light flew out from her fingertip before landing on the horse-drawn carriage driver's glabella. That's a very interesting way to put it. Meg was a little speechless, but seeing as the horse-drawn carriage driver's complexion had returned to normal, he didn't say anything else. He kicked the sawdust off the ground and asked a passerby for the location of the Rinha Food Street before slowly driving the horse-drawn carriage forward in a slightly unfamiliar manner. Meg's horse-riding skills were quite good, but this was his first time driving a horse-drawn carriage. Even though it was a little slow, he still managed to get the hang of it, and after gradually familiarizing himself with it, it was quite a smooth ride. However, as he sat outside, Meg's mind was completely focused on the carriage behind him. He still wasn't sure if Irina had already recognized him and Amy. Alex's memories of Irina had been completely erased, so he didn't even know what kind of person she was. From his current observations, he could tell that she was bold, had a unique way of thinking, was prone to violence, and had the demeanor of a queen, but none of that had much to do with her IQ. Big sister Irina, you said you'd come to find me again, but I thought it would be a long time before you did. I didn't think you'd appear so soon. Amy looked at Irina with a joyful smile on her face. She then looked outside and whispered, also, I only told Father about you. He's also super excited to see you. Really? I don't think he's showing it, Irina said doubtfully. Her voice was just loud enough for Meg, who was sitting outside, to hear. Meg blushed with shame. Amy was even trying to matchmake her parents. It's true. It's just that Father's reaction is a little slow, but I'm sure he really likes you. He's very gentle with women, Amy quickly said with certainty. You're gentle to all women. Irina's voice suddenly became a little playful. Meg suddenly felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine. He was afraid that Amy would say something she shouldn't. This was the first time he felt that women could be a little scary. Not really. Amy shook her head. That's more like it. Irina slowly loosened her clenched fists. Ooh. Meg couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Amy knew what to say and what not to say. Amy paused for a moment before continuing. Father is only gentle with teacher Luna, big sister Mia, big sister Aisha, big sister Gloria, big sister Vivian, big sister Anna. Looks like there are quite a lot of pretty big sisters. Irina's voice became a little dangerous, and the temperature in the car seemed to drop quite a bit. Luna is Amy's teacher, Mia and Aisha are the restaurant's waitresses, Miss Gloria and Miss Vivian are the customers, and Anna is a 5-year-old elf that I saved before. Meg didn't know why he had to explain, but he felt that if he didn't, his life would be in danger. As a man, he felt that this wasn't because he was afraid of his wife, but because he respected women. He was a man who respected women's rights. Yes, that must be it. I see. Irina nodded noncommittally, and the temperature in the car eased a little. Crassus, who had been silent all this time, interrupted. I heard that Miss Gloria danced with Mr. Mac at the party, right? She doesn't seem to be an ordinary customer, right? Meg suddenly had the urge to jump out of the car. Looks like Mr. Mac is really popular with young ladies, Irina said with a smile, but she obviously emphasized the words, young ladies. Amy looked at Irina in surprise. Big sister Irina, how did you know? There are a lot of young ladies lining up at the restaurant's entrance every day, wanting to be the boss wife and have children for father. Giddy up. Giddy up. Giddy up. Feeling the temperature gradually drop behind him, Meg waved the whip in his hand wildly. I'm Meg, and now, I'm a little panicked. Irina withdrew her gaze from the car curtain and looked at Amy, who was sitting obediently beside her. She rested her chin on her hands and looked at her, feeling as if her heart was about to melt. This was the daughter she had been longing for. When she was born, she was just a little girl, and she was a little ugly, so she almost lost her. She didn't expect her to grow into such an adorable girl. It had been 3 years, and she even thought that they were really gone. She didn't expect that she could still sit beside her like this. How should I improve my relationship with her? Irina looked at Amy, feeling conflicted. Children were also very unfamiliar to her. She clumsily reached out to Amy, but halfway through, she awkwardly withdrew her hand and said in a commanding tone, Amy, come into my arms. Am I too fierce? Shouldn't I be gentler? Will I scare her? As soon as she said that, Irina panicked and looked at Amy nervously. Really? Amy's eyes lit up, and she looked at Irina in disbelief. She almost couldn't believe her ears. The fairy sister, who was as beautiful as a goddess, was actually asking her to go into her arms. You don't want to. Irina opened her arms. She wanted to be gentler, but her words were still unquestionable. Of course I do. Amy nodded vigorously without even thinking. Looking at Irina's open arms, she hesitated for a moment, then carefully approached her and rested her face on her chest. It's so soft, so warm, so comfortable. Amy closed her eyes and opened her arms to hug Irina. There was a comforting fragrance on her body. It was like the fragrance of flowers, but it was more captivating than the fragrance of flowers. In this warm embrace, she felt as if she could fall asleep in an instant. If it was mother's embrace, it would definitely be this warm. Amy thought to herself, and a satisfied smile appeared on her face. Amy, my daughter, I've finally found you. Irina hugged Amy gently, feeling the warmth from the little girl in her arms. It was a wonderful feeling that connected the two of them, as if a ribbon had tied them together. She gradually calmed down from her initial discomfort and patted her gently on the back. What a wonderful feeling this was. Bam! Chapter 7:18. The two wheels of the horse-drawn carriage were lifted off the ground, and the entire carriage was hurtling toward a nearby wall. The two horses were whinnied as their hooves were suspended in midair. Meg looked at the ferocious rhinoceros carriage that had suddenly crashed into the carriage, and he gripped the reins with one hand while holding onto the shaft with the other. If the carriage were to crash into the wall, Amy and the others could be injured, and he couldn't allow that to happen. Right at this moment, a burst of gentle golden light appeared on the side of the horse-drawn carriage. The carriage that was about to crash into the wall abruptly slowed down before gently landing on the ground. PFFF. A figure rolled out of the horse-drawn carriage and landed face first on the ground in front of the carriage. Meg looked at the carriage driver on the ground. In that case, the story had come to a conclusion. He wondered if the carriage driver still remembered where he had been knocked unconscious. However, Meg's heart was still filled with rage. The shaft of the horse-drawn carriage had almost been snapped in half, and one of the corners of the carriage had been shattered. If the horse-drawn carriage hadn't stopped and crashed into the wall instead, then the entire carriage would most likely have been reduced to smithereens. This was Rodeo, and for a rhinoceros carriage to be traveling at such a speed on a narrow street like this could be considered a premeditated murder. Meg looked at the rhinoceros carriage, which was around 2 meters tall and over 3 meters long. The rhinoceros was wearing a suit of black armor, and its sharp horns were protruding from its body. It was staring at Meg with its massive eyes, seemingly itching to attack. However, Meg's attention was drawn to the insignia with the word "Big" on the rhinoceros carriage. That was the insignia of the First Prince's manor. Rhinoceros carriages weren't commonly seen in Rodeo. In particular, obsidian rhinoceroses were extremely violent and easily angered. These fourth-tier magic beasts were used by the Roth Empire's military to pull war chariots, and if they weren't being driven by an experienced beast tamer, they were extremely prone to injuring people, let alone driving on a busy street. However, the First Prince's manor was very fond of using obsidian rhinoceroses to pull their war chariots, and they were rarely involved in any accidents. Sean! An image of a person flashed through Meg's mind. The middle-aged coachman didn't appear to be flustered in the slightest after the collision. This was a horse-drawn carriage from the Second Prince's manor, and there were very few people in Rodeo who didn't recognize the insignia on the carriage. The only possibility was that someone had incited the collision, and the person sitting in the rhinoceros carriage was none other than Sean. Behind the rhinoceros carriage, there were a dozen armored knights with helmets on their heads. All of them sat on the backs of their horses with cold expressions. They had no intention of getting off the carriage. The location of the collision was at a T-junction, near the food street. It was a place with a lot of people. The loud collision and the scene of the carriages moving sideways attracted the attention of many passers-by. The badges on the two carriages caused the passers-by to whisper to each other. "Isn't that the First Prince's obsidian rhino carriage? Don't tell me the emblem on the carriage belongs to the Second Prince." The First Prince's carriage crashed into the Second Prince's carriage, and even the coachman was sent flying. This is big news. It's going to be His Majesty's birthday soon. The two princes aren't going to fight over this, are they? The violent swaying of the horse-drawn carriage also caused Amy, who was lying in Irina's arms, to raise her head with a perplexed expression as she asked in a quiet voice, "Huh? Was there a collision?" "Bastard, how dare you interrupt Amy and I while we're improving our relationship?" Irina wore a frosty expression. She had just embraced Amy in her arms, and didn't even have the chance to properly bask in the warmth that she had missed for 4 years. Who would have thought that they would be interrupted like this? A general in a suit of black armor emerged from the rhinoceros carriage before making his way over to the horse-drawn carriage. He said in a solemn voice, "Is that a horse-drawn carriage from the Second Prince's manor? This obsidian rhino suddenly went berserk and crashed into your carriage. My apologies, may I know if anyone has been injured?" "That's not how you apologize." Right at this moment, a cold voice sounded from within the horse-drawn carriage. A corner of the carriage's curtain fluttered slightly, and a figure appeared in front of the rhinoceros carriage with a chair in her hand. So beautiful. All of the passers-by's eyes lit up at the sight of the fairy who had suddenly appeared in front of the rhinoceros carriage. Her long silver hair fluttered in the wind, and she was like a celestial maiden who had descended from the heavens. No one was able to avert their eyes from her beauty, and they were all curious as to why she had suddenly appeared. Crap! The general and the horsemen behind the rhinoceros carriage were all startled by her sudden appearance. Her speed was simply astonishing, and she had appeared in front of the rhinoceros carriage in the blink of an eye. They didn't even see how she had appeared. Bam! A resounding boom erupted. The chair was shattered, sending wooden splinters flying through the air. The obsidian rhino, which had been raising its head with white vapor puffing out of its nostrils, fell to its knees as if it had been struck by a heavy hammer. Its horn, which was as hard as steel, had been flattened by the chair, and it fell to its knees in front of Irina, completely devoid of life. The rhinoceros carriage swayed slightly, and almost flipped over. Everyone present reflexively swallowed involuntarily upon seeing this. Irina appeared to be extremely frail and feeble in front of the obsidian rhino, so the sight of her slamming the obsidian rhino to the ground with a chair was even more astonishing to everyone. This was a fifth-tier magic beast that was renowned for its defensive prowess. Even a fifth-tier knight would find it very difficult to defeat it, let alone slamming it to death with a wooden chair. Seeing as you can't even control a little rhino, I'll do it for you. Irina tossed the wooden chair leg in her hand onto the ground before turning to the general and the horsemen with a cold expression. Don't release anything that you can't control in the future. Otherwise, I'll kill every single one of them that I see. You! One of the horsemen drew his long sword in an attempt to charge forward and arrest the disrespectful fairy. Are you insane? That's the elven princess we're talking about. The knight beside him grabbed his collar and almost pulled him down from the horse's back as he said with a nervous expression. The elven princess. The knight's voice trembled as he fell from his horse's back in shock. The Roth Empire's military had a list of 3 ts to be messed with the number 1 being elven princess Irina. She had once traveled with Alex, and had left behind many legends. She had once been regarded as the only candidate to become Alex's wife. Of course, that wasn't the reason why she couldn't be messed with. Instead, it was because everyone who had messed with her had been severely punished. For example, that obsidian rhino had suffered a relatively quick death. All of the horsemen didn't dare to do anything rash. Even the general who had just spoken wore an uneasy expression, and didn't dare to step forward. Who would have thought that an elven princess would appear out of nowhere? The entire carriage fell extremely silent. Wow, big sister Irina is so awesome. Amy clapped her little hands with reverence on her little face. Chapter 7:19. A tall and broad figure emerged from the rhinoceros carriage. His suit of golden armor shimmered under the sun, making his chiseled features even more intimidating. He had a hand on the long sword hanging from his waist, and was giving off a powerful aura as he appraised Irina calmly. He wasn't enraged in the slightest by her words. It really is him. Meg's eyes narrowed slightly, but he quickly returned to normal. This was the first prince who had once shared a cup of wine with Alex at the border, and he was also one of the instigators behind the incident 3 years ago. Everyone thought that Alex and the first prince were very close, so if the second prince were to vie for the throne, he would definitely side with the first prince. However, that was all in the past. After the soldiers on the border shed their disguises as normal people and gradually became the rising stars of the Roth Empire's military, the two of them gradually drifted apart due to their greed and power. It's His Highness. All of the passers-by extended respectful salutes at the sight of Sean emerging from the rhinoceros carriage. Ever since Alex's death, the invincible Sean had gradually replaced Alex's title as the God of War, becoming the new guardian of the Empire. Sean's status in the hearts of the common people was far inferior to Josh's, but during the past 2 to 3 years, he had won the hearts and minds of many of the common people, and he was already on par with Josh. He was undoubtedly one of the people who had benefited from Alex's death. Sean nodded at the passers-by with a smile on his face. Even though his aura was very powerful, it didn't make him seem all that distant and aloof. Looks like he's really gone crazy trying to become the king. He's even learned the superficial skills of a politician. Meg couldn't help but grumble internally. He couldn't be bothered to participate in the battle for the throne. Politics was too complicated, and he would rather be in the kitchen. However, he didn't like either of the two people who were going to vie for the throne. Whichever one of them became the king wasn't something to be happy about, so he was feeling rather conflicted. Furthermore, what was giving Meg a headache was Irina, who had rushed out and killed the obsidian rhinoceros with a chair. He had thought that she would keep a low profile, but it appeared that the word low profile didn't exist in her dictionary. Their family of 3 had gathered together in a horse-drawn carriage, and it had been crashed into by Sean, so it was very difficult for them not to arouse suspicion. Irina looked at Sean with a smile, and said, "I like to beat the dog's owner, of dog's owners dogs loose, so I hope you can keep an eye on your dog's owner's personality. And you, of owners, so I hope you'll be careful. Your Highness is right. I will tie up all the dogs at home when I go back." Sean still didn't appear to be enraged in the slightest. He turned to Mag with a smile, and said, "However, I didn't think that your Highness would already be in Rodu, and that you would be riding on the second prince's horse-drawn carriage. May I know who you are? Is he an honored guest of yours?" Sean's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at Meg, who was standing in front of the horse-drawn carriage. He had just received news the day before that Josh had found a chef by the name of Meg in Chaos City, and was going to invite him to cook for the king. Furthermore, that chef had a half-elf daughter who was around 3 or 4 years old. According to the latest news from the cheetahs, Bertley, who had been tailing Louis XIII, had gone missing in Chaos City. Coincidences like these were far too ingenious, and Sean couldn't help but want to try it out himself. Who would have thought that he would bump into Irina? A chef by the name of Meg and a half-elf daughter who was around 3 or 4 years old. They had just arrived in Chaos City, and Irina was riding in the same horse-drawn carriage as them. Was this really just a coincidence? That was far too much of a coincidence. Sean refused to believe that so many coincidences would coincide with the same person. Furthermore, that person was none other than Alex, whom he had been searching for this entire time. Meg's heart sank slightly upon hearing this. He had only just gotten past Josh, and now Sean had come knocking on his door. On top of that, he had dragged Irina into this as well. It was going to be very difficult for him to clear his name. After all, he couldn't display his culinary skills in public. Right at this moment, Crassus emerged from within the carriage, and turned to Sean with a smile as he asked, "Would I count as an honored guest, your Highness?" Crassus. Sean's pupils contracted upon hearing this. Irina was already enough to surprise him, but who would have thought that there would be a Crassus hidden in this tiny horse-drawn carriage? Sean's expression quickly returned to normal, and he smiled as he said, "So it's Master Crassus. Of course you're an honored guest. I heard that you went to Chaos City. I didn't think that you would also be in Rodu. Who is Master Crassus? Why is His Highness so respectful toward him? You don't even know who Master Crassus is. How dare you say that you're from the Roth Empire?" That's right. 50 years ago, Master Crassus was just like Master Alex a few years ago. He dominated the entire continent on his own, and even giant dragons had to transform into their human forms to enter Rodu. Otherwise, they would have been struck down from the sky. That's right. The current Magus Tower is only what it is today because of Master Crassus' illustrious achievements. Otherwise, how could it be taller than the royal palace? All of the passers-by began to discuss spiritedly among themselves upon hearing that. Some elderly people were very excited when they talked about Crassus' feats, and wanted nothing more than to rush up to Crassus to express their admiration for him. Crassus pursed his lips and said, "I'm not a tree, I have to stay wherever I grow." "Sean, you haven't even become the king yet, and you're already trying to control where I go." Sean's expression became even more cautious. Crassus had an extremely special status in the Roth Empire, and was not inferior to Alex's status in the past. He had severed his ties with the Magus Tower and left Chaos City, which was undoubtedly the equivalent of cutting off an arm of Josh's, and that made him extremely elated. However, he was now disembarking from Josh's horse-drawn carriage, and appeared to be in a very bad mood. If he were to stand on Josh's side again, that would clearly be unacceptable to him. "You're too kind, Master Crassus. I'm just concerned about you. There's no place on the Norland continent that you can't go to," Sean said with a smile. Crassus looked at Sean with a smile, and said, "In that case, I've only just arrived in Rodu, so I'm taking my precious disciple out to eat some good food, and I'm also taking little Irina out for a chat. I don't think that's a problem for you, right? You don't have to use such a huge magic beast to kill me, do you?" The food street is too crowded. "Let's park the carriage here and walk there," Meg said with a smile as he lifted the curtain of the carriage. Okay. I want Father to hug me. I want you to lift me up high." Amy was the first to run out. She then opened her arms and pouted at Meg. "This is my man." Irina raised an eyebrow and turned to look at Meg. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she asked, "You dare to hug another woman?" "Okay, Father will hug you. Father will lift you up high." Meg smiled as he picked up Amy. He lifted her up above his head, then put her down. He lifted her up again, and then put her down again. So high. This is so fun. Amy called out happily. Her face was full of smiles. After lifting her up 5 or 6 times, Meg finally hugged Amy in his arms and kissed her forehead. He was in a great mood. He didn't just hug her. He even kissed her. Irina glared. However, when she looked at Amy, her gaze softened. She felt a little strange. It was as if hugging and kissing her daughter on the forehead wasn't something out of line. But why are they so intimate? Irina looked at Meg and Amy, who were beaming with smiles, and felt a little jealous. Meg didn't even look at her from start to finish. It was as if Amy was the only person in his eyes. "Big sister Irina, what's wrong? Do you also want Father to hug you and lift you up high?" Amy turned to look at Irina and asked with concern. Then she patted Meg on the shoulder and whispered in his ear, "Father, your chance is here." Irina almost blurted out the word, "I want." However, when she looked at Meg, who was looking at her calmly as if she was a stranger, she paused and said, "I don't want to." Then she jumped out of the carriage. Meg raised his eyebrows. He was helpless against Amy, who was trying so hard to set him up with Irina. What kind of chance was this? "You guys go eat first. I'm going to look for an old friend. I'll come back later," Crassus said with a smile as he got out of the carriage. Then he left with his magic caster's staff. There was no one else in the alley. Meg looked at Irina, and Irina looked back at Meg. The two of them stared at each other in silence, and the atmosphere seemed to have become a little awkward. After a long while of awkward silence, Amy asked in a quiet voice, do you two like each other? Irina took Amy from her arms, then pointed at Ugly Duckling, which was squeaking feebly on the shaft of the carriage, and ordered, I'll hold Amy, you hold it. All right. Meg looked at Irina, who was holding Amy without any intention of negotiating, and picked up Ugly Duckling with a resigned expression. She wanted to hold her own child, so how could he stop her? Besides, even if he wanted to stop her, how could he? They weren't even on the same level as each other. He was like that obsidian rhinoceros, who could easily flatten a wooden chair with a swat. Most importantly, she was actually a magic caster. Hence, after a series of careful deductions, Meg decided to hold Ugly Duckling obediently. Regardless of when they reunited, it was clearly a good thing to allow Amy and Irina to interact and improve their relationship. However, he wasn't in the mood for the drama of a domineering princess falling in love with him just yet. He would marry a rich and beautiful woman, reach the pinnacle of his life, and become the most powerful man in this world. He would have the most beautiful woman in the world by his side, and be envied by all of the men in the world. That sounded like a wonderful idea, but when he thought about how he would only be able to hold Ugly Duckling at home every day and watch Amy and her mother being lovey-dovey, he simply couldn't imagine a life without any human rights. Since he had transmigrated to this world, even if he couldn't establish a harem and live a blissful life, he had to at least be a proper husband. No. I have to recover my powers as soon as possible. Meg made up his mind. Irina had only taken a few steps when she suddenly turned around to look at Meg. You seem to be very displeased with me. Chapter 721. Amy turned to Meg with an anxious expression. Why would father say something like that? What if big sister Irina got upset? Irina had a playful look in her eyes, and a dangerous aura emanated from behind her smile. Meg could sense a frosty aura sweeping toward him, and he wanted to slap himself for jumping into such an obvious trap. He forced a smile onto his face, and said, No, I'm not displeased with you, Princess Amy. I'm very happy that you're treating Amy so well, even though you're of such high status. I'm just upset with myself for making the princess carry Amy, while I'm carrying an ugly duckling. Is that really the case? Irina looked into Meg's eyes. Of course. Meg nodded with certainty. His gaze was firm and unwavering. Alex has never lied to me. Even though I feel like he's changed a little, I don't think he'll lie to me. Irina withdrew her gaze and walked toward the alleyway with Amy in her arms. Let's eat. I'm hungry. Phew. Meg heaved a sigh of relief. He felt as if he had pulled his foot back from the jaws of death. Good luck, father. Amy said soundlessly to Meg as she clenched her little fists to encourage him. Meg nodded and composed himself. He quickly followed along with Ugly Duckling in his arms. Even if it was to create a strong image of his father in front of Amy, he couldn't back down. After exiting the alleyway, a bustling and wide street appeared before the three of them. There were 2 or 3 stories tall European-style buildings on both sides of the street. They were mainly grayish-yellow in color, with domed roofs and stone pillars. There were also a series of restaurants situated on both sides of the street. There were also a series of small stalls on both sides of the street, where chefs from all over the world were displaying their skills. Cece was bustling with activity as people passed through the stalls and restaurants. There were all kinds of delicious aromas wafting through the air, and it was like a river of delicious food. Meg looked at the bustling crowd on the Cece street, and couldn't help but exclaim internally, it's not inferior to the modern Gourmet street at all. However, there was a clear difference between the customers who wandered around the street stalls and the customers who went in and out of the high-end restaurants. The customers of the street stalls were obviously dressed shabbily. Most of them seemed to be ordinary civilians. It was rare to see someone who was dressed extravagantly. As for the customers entering and leaving the restaurant, most of them were dressed extravagantly. Carriages picked them up and dropped them off. It could be said that they were clearly separated. Meg wasn't too disgusted or cynical about this. After all, Mimi's had a higher threshold than the other restaurants on the street. However, almost the entire street was like this, and there were even restaurant doors that brazenly prohibited civilians from entering, which still made him frown. The political system of the Roth Empire was similar to that of England during the Middle Ages. However, after establishing the Roth Empire, the king of the Roth Empire adopted a policy of centralization of power. The nobles had the right to use their territory, but they didn't have the right to own it. This was similar to the national system in China during the Sui and Tang dynasties. This approach allowed the king to have a high degree of centralization of power, giving him the power to oversee the entire empire, and ensuring that his policies and orders were carried out perfectly. However, the flaws of the feudal system were almost identical. The nobles didn't have the right to own any land, but they were still part of the upper class of the Roth Empire. They had many special privileges, and there was no equality between them and the commoners. The restaurant doors that blatantly prohibited civilians from entering was only a small part of this feudal empire. In the eyes of the nobles, commoners were nothing more than lowly beings who could be killed. Meg looked at the conspicuous sign on the door of a rotisserie by the name of Carey's Rotisserie, and clenched his fists as he thought to himself, I should tear down a sign like this and stick it on the owner's face. Compared to this city, he really did prefer Chaos City. At the very least, it gave him a sense of hope for equality. What do you want to eat? Irina asked in a nonchalant manner as she looked at Meg. I think. Meg withdrew his gaze, and began to look around with a serious expression. Let's go to this rotisserie. Irina carried Amy over to the rotisserie next door. Meg looked at Irina's departing figure. She didn't need an answer from him at all. He quickly caught up to her, and shrugged as he pointed at the sign on the door, and said, I'm a commoner, not a noble. I also hate being called a noble, but as long as you're standing beside me, you're very important. Irina stopped in her tracks as she looked at Meg. This feeling of being a kept man really is awesome. Meg's eyes gradually widened as he raised an eyebrow. Meg tried his best to repress his urge to live off Irina, and shook his head firmly as he said, I don't want to become a noble either. My restaurant should be more expensive than theirs, but I've never restricted who comes to eat there. Rip. Irina stared at Meg for a while before tearing down the sign on the door, and tossing it aside as she asked, Are you happy now? I'm getting a little flustered. Meg looked at the sign on the ground, then at Irina's calm expression, and was momentarily at a loss for words. Irina's act of tearing down the sign on the door of Carey's Rotisserie immediately attracted the attention of many people. The beautiful and holy Irina was breathtaking, while the little half-elf girl in her arms was adorable and adorable. They were like a pair of jade statues, and no one was able to look away from them. Everyone then followed the gazes of Irina and the little half-elf girl to Meg, who was standing off to the side with Ugly Duckling in his arms, and peculiar looks immediately appeared on everyone's faces. He's clearly a lucky bastard. He's a grown man, but he's holding a kitten. That's right. Look at how cute that little girl is. If he didn't find a beautiful wife, would he have been able to give birth to her? That's right. What a beautiful flower, stuck in a pile of cow dung. As Meg listened to those sour words, he felt inexplicably good. It was just like in his previous life when he saw those anti-fans continuously spamming his Weibo, if you didn't have a good father, you would be nothing. If you didn't have good reincarnation skills, which internet celebrity would fancy you? If you didn't, now that he thought about it, he really did miss it. He liked this feeling of jealousy and envy when everyone was unhappy with him, but they still had to watch from the side. Reincarnation was a skill, so how could he be blamed? Look at how good his craftsmanship is. He has drawn the best lot twice. There was no solution. Chapter 722. Carrie's rotisserie was quite renowned on the Rinha food street, and it was renowned as the #1 rotisserie on the food street. Apparently, the true owner of this rotisserie was a duke with an extremely lofty status. Furthermore, the rotisserie had a rule that it only served nobles with noble titles, not commoners. Even so, there was still an endless stream of customers coming to the rotisserie every day just to taste the renowned grilled meat on the iron plate. Rodu was filled with nobles, and a single brick could easily knock over 5 or 6 viscounts. As such, the popularity of Carrie's rotisserie was extremely high. Ike stood at the entrance with a disdainful expression on his face as he looked around. As the head chef of Carrie's rotisserie, he had seen an entire table of dukes, yet someone dared to tear down the sign of his rotisserie. This was an absolute humiliation to him. His gaze fell upon Irina, and he was slightly taken aback. This elf who was hugging a little half-elf girl was simply too beautiful. Furthermore, according to his many years of experience, this elf's attire and disposition were definitely not that of an ordinary elf. Following the war among species, the relationship between the elven race and the human race had become one of the more harmonious races. There had never been any battles on the border, and the two races had only set up some symbolic sentries along the border without deploying any troops. As for intermarriage between humans and elves, even though it was still quite unpopular, it wasn't completely unheard of, and there were even some high-ranking nobles among those who did. Of course, the most renowned among them was naturally General Alex and Princess Irina, who had appeared as a couple several years ago. A man who's able to marry such a beautiful elf as his wife must be no ordinary man. Ike made a judgment in his heart as he turned to Meg. Meg was wearing an ordinary black robe that didn't appear to be extravagant in the slightest, and Ike's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this. Is this guy a coachman? He doesn't look like a man who could have such an adorable child at all. Well, that's awkward. Tearing down the sign is going to ruin everything. Meg glanced at the sign on the ground before turning to Ike. There were so many people looking at them, and if Irina were to reveal her identity, news of Irina meeting a man with a half-elf girl in her arms and having a child out of wedlock would most likely spread throughout the entire Rodu. Everyone loved to gossip about princesses, and it wouldn't be a big deal if others were to hear about it, but if someone were to hear about it, they would immediately suspect him. Ding! System random mission, host, please set up a stall and make it the most popular stall on the entire street within half a day. Mission reward, a recipe for stinky tofu. Mission failure punishment, physical strength -1. Right at this moment, the system's voice suddenly sounded in Mag's mind. System. What are you doing? Do you think it's that easy to become the king of roadside stalls? Mag raised an eyebrow. He hadn't thought of a solution yet, but the system had already appeared, and even issued such a strange mission. He had a good impression of roadside stalls. In his previous life, he had often bought skewers from roadside stalls. As long as the ingredients were clean and the taste wasn't bad, he would give it a try. However, it was very difficult for roadside stalls to survive if they didn't have some skills, let alone become popular. All of the roadside stalls on Rodu's most popular food street were doing quite well, and with the rental fees, they would most likely close down in just a few days if they didn't have some skills. Meg didn't have a stall, and he didn't have any cooking utensils or ingredients with him, so the system was clearly toying with him. Host, you're the man who's going to become the god of cookery. If you can't even solve a problem like this, how are you going to shoulder such a heavy burden? Go ahead, you'll have to start by becoming the king of roadside stalls. The system said with perfect articulation. I'll ask you again, who tore down my sign? Ike asked in a loud voice as he turned to Meg. That man isn't going to make that beautiful elf suffer the consequences, is he? All of the passers-by looked at the dazed Meg with displeasure in their hearts. What a beautiful flower. Irina looked at Ike with an honest expression as she said, "It was me, because I think your sign is very insulting to us commoners. As a commoner chef, I believe that food can be measured by money, but it shouldn't be eaten by people of different social classes." Meg cut off Irina's words as he took 2 steps forward and sniffed toward the rotisserie. He then turned to Ike with a perplexed expression as he asked, "Also, do you think only nobles deserve to eat ordinary rotisserie? Who gave you the confidence to do that?" Irina turned to Meg with a hint of surprise on her face. He hadn't been so good with words in the past, but after thinking about it, she could roughly guess why Meg didn't want her to mention his name, so she didn't say anything further. "So he's not a couple with that beautiful elf." "As expected, he's a lot more pleasing to the eye now." "I'm so happy to hear that." Every time he passed by this barbecue restaurant, he saw the notice hanging on the door and wanted to tear it down. "I don't want to eat that rotisserie." Who would have thought that he's also a chef? However, Carrie's Rotisserie is renowned for its rotisserie, and it's one of the top 3 rotisserie restaurants in Rodou. How can this guy say that his rotisserie is ordinary? Could it be that he can cook even better rotisserie? All of the passers-by turned to look at Meg upon hearing that. They had thought that he was just a gigolo hiding behind his beautiful wife, but who would have thought that he would stand up for himself? He wasn't backing down in the slightest, and his words made all of the commoners feel as if they had vented their frustrations. This is so fucking satisfying. I feel like I've vented all of my frustrations over the past few days. There was a barbecue stall in front of Carrie's Rotisserie, and the owner of the stall, Sinclair, was looking at Meg with an elated expression. He had already taken over this stall for half a month, and he wanted to make a big splash. However, he didn't think that the rotisserie that was so popular at home would be so unpopular on the food street. On top of that, he was constantly being mocked by the owner of Carrie's Rotisserie, as well as his employees. The owner and employees of Carrie's Rotisserie were all extremely haughty and arrogant just because all of the customers were nobles. Ike was so enraged that he burst into laughter as he pointed his knife at Meg. "You little brat. How dare you criticize Carrie's Rotisserie like that? Aren't you afraid of getting into trouble? You know, even Duke Abraham said that my barbecued meat was good after tasting it. Who do you think you are?" Chapter 723. You're saying that Crassus has also come to Rodou, and he took his disciple to the Magus Tower to defeat Kola. Furthermore, Irina also beat Brent up in the Magus Tower at the same time. Within a unicorn carriage that had just sped out of the royal palace, Josh's brows furrowed slightly as he looked at the magic caster sitting across from him. The magic caster nodded respectfully, and replied, "That's right, Your Highness. The president is more concerned about whether Princess Irina will continue to attack the Magus Tower. When the time comes, the Magus Tower will retaliate." Josh's expression remained calm as he said, "I'll go and meet Irina in person. Tell the president to rest assured that she most likely won't attack the Magus Tower again. As for Crassus, if the president can mend his relationship with him and get him to stand on our side, then that would naturally be a good thing. His disciple is currently living in my manor, so I'll be sure to push for that. Please apologize to the president on my behalf." "All right, I'll report to the president right away." The black-robed magic caster nodded, and the horse-drawn carriage stopped at the entrance of an alleyway before disappearing from sight in the blink of an eye. The horse-drawn carriage continued onward, and Josh's brows furrowed tightly as he murmured to himself, "Is it just a coincidence that they appeared there at the same time? She's not even 4 years old, yet she was able to defeat Kola with ease. Such aptitude and power are hard to come by even once in 1,000 years. If Meg isn't Alex, then could that little girl be their daughter?" "Your Highness, we've lost contact with the 2 cheetah members who were tailing them." Should we send more people to track them down? Quinn asked in a quiet voice as he appeared in a private room on the second floor of a restaurant. Sean shook his head in response. There's no need for that. As long as Crassus doesn't want to, no one will be able to keep an eye on him. Quinn continued, I just received some information about Crassus. 2 months ago, he took in a half-elf disciple who's around 3 years old in Chaos City. That disciple's father is the owner of a restaurant by the name of Amy's. According to the latest news from the Mage Tower, Crassus brought his disciple to the Mage Tower and defeated Richard's disciple. Brent was attacked by an unknown person in the Magus Tower and was severely injured. Sean made his way over to the window with a smile, and said, Josh invited the father of Crassus' disciple to cook for the king, but Crassus and his disciple wreaked havoc in the Magus Tower. If I'm not mistaken, the mysterious person who beat up Brent was most likely Irina. After that, she reunited with Crassus and the others before boarding the same horse-drawn carriage as the second prince's manor. To put it simply, did Joshua find someone to slap the face of the Magus Tower? Could it be? There's already a rift between Joshua and the Magus Tower? Is that why he hired someone to attack the Magus Tower? Quinn was rather surprised to hear this. Sean shook his head, and said, if it were someone else, that would be a possibility. However, Crassus and Irina are not people who can be bribed, so it's most likely that even Joshua himself didn't expect something like this to happen. However, this is undoubtedly a good thing for us. If we can get the spy in the Magus Tower to instigate this, it'll be a good thing for us as long as we can create a rift between Joshua and the Magus Tower. Yes, Quinn replied in a respectful manner before departing. Regardless of whether you're Alex or not, perhaps we're on the same side again this time. Sean picked up a glass of wine from the table and downed it in one gulp. In the face of Meg's question, Sinclair only faltered for a second before nodding without any hesitation. It's a deal. You can use all of the ingredients and kitchenware for free as long as you pay the cost of the ingredients. If necessary, I can even be your assistant. Meg looked at Sinclair, who had only taken 3 seconds to put the apron on Sinclair and shove a boning knife into his hand. The bearded man was more enthusiastic than he had expected, and he nodded with a smile as he said, thank you. If it's possible, I'll need you to help me collect the money. I'll pay you double the salary of a cashier. It's my pleasure, sir, Sinclair replied with a smile. Cindy said with a smile. Out of nowhere, she pulled out an apron with the word cashier written on it and put it on. Sinclair could sense Meg's peculiar gaze, and an awkward smile appeared on his face as he said, I had prepared this because I thought business would be booming, but I haven't had the chance to use it yet. Very good. Meg nodded with a smile. This temporary employee was quite interesting. Ike chuckled coldly as he looked at Mag and said, do you think a simple roadside stall can prove anything? People with real status would never stoop so low as to eat from a roadside stall like yours. A chef like you is only fit to stand on the side of the road for the rest of your life, cooking low-class barbecue for commoners. Barbecue doesn't become noble just because of who eats it. Mag looked at Ike with a calm expression and said, how about we make a bet? I'll spend half a day cooking roast meat here, and let's see if my humble roadside stall attracts more customers during that time, or if your self-proclaimed high-class rotisserie is going to attract more customers. If you lose, you're not allowed to put up this sign in the future, and if I lose, you can do whatever you want with me. You said it yourself. Ike glared at Meg, and countless ways to punish Meg had already appeared in his mind. His restaurant was the most popular barbecue stall on the food street, and over 1,000 customers were served every day. How dare he challenge Carrie by renting a small roadside stall? What a fool. In order to protect Carrie's reputation, he had no choice but to accept this bet. Of course, what he wanted to do more than anything else was to grind Carrie's disgusting face into the ground. Meg nodded and said, "Very good, then let's begin now. Find a worker to keep an eye on my stall and record the number of customers. I'll keep track of all the customers who enter and leave your restaurant." "You're going to cry." I harumphed coldly before entering the barbecue stall. Soon, a worker came out and stood beside the stall, looking down at Meg and Sinclair with his nostrils. Sinclair approached Meg and whispered, "Aren't you being a little too harsh on yourself, sir? If you want to leave now, I can cover for you. I'm going to be super busy in a while. I hope you're good at math." Meg patted Sinclair on the shoulder with a smile. "By the way, you can call me Mr. Mac. Can you find me some paper and a pen?" "Paper and a pen. I just bought a new one for my daughter today." Sinclair rummaged under the cart for a while, and pulled out a stack of white paper and a quill. "Thank you." Meg accepted the pen and paper, dipped it in ink, and began to write on the paper. Soon, a piece of paper was pasted onto the original sign of the barbecue stall. Chapter 724. He's trying to compete with Carrie's rotisserie, which is so popular that it has almost no business at all. Is he dreaming? Could it be that the owner of this stall bribed someone? Is he trying to use this to hype up his own rotisserie? You don't say. That's actually a possibility. Otherwise, why would an idiot do something like this? Even though I like what this guy is saying, isn't he just throwing an egg at a rock? Roast beef for 1 silver coin per cube. Since when was beef sold by cubes? Amy's. How come I've never heard of this restaurant? Could it be that they're trying to hype up this restaurant? All of the passers-by and nearby stall owners were discussing quietly among themselves as they looked at Meg's new signboard. It was quite clear that not many people were optimistic that Meg would be able to make a comeback. Alex is going to set up a stall to sell roast beef. Is it edible? Irina looked at Meg with a skeptical expression. Back in the day, Alex had even eaten all of the food that she cooked, and the only thing that he didn't eat when it came to cooking was raw meat. But now, he was going to rent this stall and make a bet with someone else. Was he going to do better than the stall owner in a single afternoon? Big sister Irina, father is going to set up a stall. Let's be the first customers. Father's roast beef kebabs are super delicious. Amy's eyes lit up, and she got down from Irina's arms before leading her over to the outdoor table beside the stall. Father really is smart. As long as I eat his delicious food, big sister Irina will definitely fall in love with him. You won't die from eating it, right? Irina was still skeptical. After all, Alex was someone who could eat so much roast chicken that she threw up. Of course not. Amy shook her head with a confident expression. It really is super delicious. All right, I believe in Amy. Irina smiled as she stroked Amy's hair and sat down on a stool with Amy. Sinclair looked at Meg's new signboard and asked suspiciously, "Mr. Mac, did you write the wrong signboard? This is a piece of beef, right? How can you describe it as a grain?" "That's right, there's only one. It's about this size." Meg made a circle with his index finger and thumb as he continued to inspect the ingredients that Sinclair had prepared. There were 2 large pieces of ordinary beef tenderloin. The freshness of the tenderloin was not bad. It should have just been slaughtered in the morning. There were ice cubes underneath. The stall was using a charcoal grill and a long barbecue rack. Beside it were palm-sized slices of steak, which should be the barbecue meat that Sinclair was selling. As for the seasoning, Meg looked around and found only salt. What a Buddhist-style barbecue. It doesn't even have any oil. Is it dry roast beef? It's no wonder that business is so good. Meg couldn't help but grumble in his mind. This was a lean beef tenderloin. If it were beef tenderloin, there would at least be some oil. System, I don't want anything else. Give me a bottle of cumin and a bottle of black pepper. Meg was a little speechless as he closed the condiment box. Host, this mission, if you're not selling, then I'll double the price and have someone else buy it for me. Meg calmly interrupted the system. The system is at your service. A bottle of cumin and a bottle of black pepper have been delivered. Double the price has been successfully deducted. Please specify where to receive the goods. The system's cheerful voice sounded. Holy fuck. Did I agree to double the price? Meg raised an eyebrow. I'll double the price and have someone else buy it for me. I'll double the price and have someone else. A voice recording played in Meg's mind on a loop. The system will provide you with the best service. The system's voice seemed to have a face behind it with a professional fake smile. You're fucking awesome. Meg was feeling a little conflicted. As expected, when the system was shameless, even he had to back down a little. Is it this big? Are you sure? Sinclair pressed his eyes closer to the small circle, and looked at Mag through it with an incredulous expression. How could someone be willing to buy a single cube of beef of this size? Furthermore, each cube cost a silver coin, while his entire steak was only selling for 20 copper coins. Meg waved the toothpick container next to him and looked at Sinclair. Yes, Mr. Sinclair. If you have time, can you help me buy a bucket of high-quality rapeseed oil and 10 toothpicks from other vendors? Toothpicks. Is Mr. Mack worried that customers will need to pick their teeth after eating beef? Don't worry. According to my experience, customers rarely ask for toothpicks. These toothpicks are enough. Sinclair shook his head with a smile. No, the toothpicks are for skewers of meat. Meg shook his head and looked at Sinclair with a serious expression. It's getting late. If Mr. Sinclair is willing to work for me for half a day, I hope you can ask fewer questions. Otherwise, I'll change my staff. As expected, Meg still preferred Yabamiya and Sally, who were quick on their feet and didn't talk much. This bearded man was a little too active and wasn't a good employee. Sinclair looked at Meg's serious expression and hesitated for a moment. Even though he had a lot of questions to ask, he swallowed them all and nodded. Okay, Mr. Mack. He then immediately turned around and walked to the stall next door. Even though he had already decided to sell this stall and announce that his business had failed, he still wasn't willing to give up. If he could slap Carrie's rotisserie in the face before he left, then he would be very happy. Now, he just had to see if this Mr. Mack really had the ability to do so. Meg pulled out 2 bottles of seasoning powder from the cart. After his last experience, Meg no longer trusted the system to transfer things into his pocket. Irina was watching from the side. Looks like we'll have to eat my roast meat for lunch today. Meg looked at Irina and Amy with a smile. Don't worry, I'll eat Father's roast beef 10,000 times. Amy raised her little hand and yelled. Irina looked at Meg with a serious expression and said, I hope I'll be able to make it to the next restaurant alive after eating it. I think you'll like it. Meg smiled as he turned around and began to prepare the beef. It appeared that Alex's cooking skills were even worse than he had imagined. All of the beef was cut into 2-centimeter cubes by Meg. There were 2 large cubes of beef, so there were over 1,000 cubes in total. After that, Meg went to a few other stalls and bought some seasoning powder from the stall owners. After that, he placed all of the cubes of beef into a large basin for further research. Due to the limitations of ingredients and time, Meg naturally couldn't make beef kebabs of the same standard as the ones he had made in the restaurant. However, at 1 silver coin per kebab, it was still worth it. His goal for the afternoon was to sell all of the beef he had. I almost forgot. Meg suddenly slapped his own forehead as he took out a pen and scribbled a few words on the notice. Ike waved his hand, which made the other chefs respond. Sinclair looked around before catching sight of the watch on Meg's wrist. He was a little surprised that Meg was able to afford such a small and intricate magic watch, but his eyes also lit up as he made his way over to Meg, and asked in a quiet voice, "Mr. Mac, can you tell me what time it is?" "It's almost 12:00. We've been marinating it for half an hour, so it's about time." Meg glanced at his watch before rising to his feet and making his way over to his stall. He was quite amused as he naturally knew what Sinclair was thinking. Half an hour of marinating time was still too short, but if he didn't start now, then it would be too late. "Good luck." Sinclair clenched his fists as he encouraged his son. "Boss Sinclair, this isn't very suitable for you." Meg looked at Sinclair with a complex expression. "Good luck, father." "Good luck." Amy clenched her little fists as she yelled in a baby voice. "See, this is the standard version." Meg looked at Amy with a smile on his face. As expected, Amy was much more pleasing to the eye. "This world only cares about looks, but it can't see my interesting soul." "Instead, it chose a beautiful body," Sinclair lamented with a pained expression. "A beautiful body is cute and adorable, but an interesting soul is a face full of beard. This is a test, so there's no need to choose." Meg calmly added charcoal into the oven. "Mr. Mac, you're so cruel." Sinclair clasped a hand over his heart. "This isn't suitable for you either." Sinclair wore a serious expression as he said, "I've given you everything, so I hope you won't let me down. Isn't it just a roadside stall that's on the verge of closing down? I bought back your beef, so you're not going to make any losses today. On top of that, I'll also give you a temporary job as a cashier with double the salary. You should be thanking me." Meg shrugged. "Mr. Mac, don't be like that. I didn't go to any lakeside, and I didn't do anything to you. Now, please shut up." Meg glanced at Sinclair, and didn't realize that this guy was quite good at acting. "All right." Sinclair retracted his expression and stood expressionlessly beside the cart. After finally calming down, Meg tested the temperature with his hands before placing a piece of beef onto the barbed wire grill. As soon as the beef came into contact with the hot grill, a sizzling sound immediately rang out. Meg held a brush in his left hand and quickly brushed a layer of oil onto each piece of beef. Soon, the aroma of the beef wafted through the air. "So he's finally starting to grill the beef. This beef is really sliced into cubes. He's selling these tiny cubes for 1 silver coin. This boss must be crazy for money, right? I've seen beef sliced and grilled, but I've never seen beef sliced into cubes before. What's more, he's only selling 1 cube. Carrie's rotisserie's beef really is delicious. All of the customers are nobles, and even earls are often seen there. How can a roadside stall like this compare?" All of the passers-by and stall owners immediately began to discuss spiritedly among themselves at the sight of Meg. Can he really make delicious beef like this? Sinclair stared at Meg with a skeptical expression, and he swallowed his words on several occasions. In any case, no one would eat his roast beef anyway, so he knew that he wasn't going to be able to do that. "Write a note for each customer, and I'll keep an eye on them." Meg took the opportunity to hand a pen and paper over to the employee from Carrie's rotisserie, who was on the verge of falling asleep. "Do you need it?" "I don't think you'll even get a single customer," the employee said in a disdainful manner as he appraised Meg with a disdainful expression. Meg slapped the pen and paper onto the employee's face with a smile, and said, "I'm afraid that with your IQ, you'll make a mistake when there are so many customers." The employee was jolted awake by Meg's slap, and his eyes were filled with rage as he clasped a hand over his reddened face. "You've become a little more talkative, but your personality is still the same, right?" Irina silently put down the chair in her hand. "This is a bet between me and your boss. You won't be able to afford the consequences if you ruin it. Meg pursed his lips as he picked up some cumin and black pepper powder. I saved your life, you idiot. Even a fifth-tier magic beast would be killed by that chair. When you lose, I'll show you what cruelty is. The employee gritted his teeth as he gripped onto the pen and paper in his hand tightly. The beef sizzled on the grill, and its aroma was already beginning to spread through the air. The cumin and black pepper powder were sprinkled evenly over the beef, and it was like a miraculous catalyst that instantly transformed the mild beef aroma into a delectable barbecue aroma that proliferated in all directions like a delicious bomb. This aroma. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.